2 hours of dark topics approached in cartoons. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. This is the finale of our Approached in Cartoons series. So you're probably wondering, why is the video 2 hours long? Well, first of all, this is a documentary channel, so everything is at least 30 minutes or longer. At least I try to make it 30 minutes or longer. However, this is my first ever compilation video. And now you might be saying, but Sir Tuv, you're amazing and handsome. But also, isn't this just like one of your laziest uploads technically? Well, I didn't want it to seem that way. So for every topic we talk about, I included 2 new subjects, maybe even 3 for some of them, for each one. So we keep it refreshing throughout, and I'm sure not all of you guys have seen every single video of mine. And if you have, well then, I guess you could just watch the newer parts. Maybe watch the whole video. But yeah, I wanted to make this compilation for new viewers, as well as add some cartoon episodes I've never spoken about. I'm trying to satisfy both new and OG viewers. If you're an OG viewer, shout out to you. Before we get into the topic, I do want to let you guys know that this video is brought to you by me. In case you guys don't know, I have a brand. However, I'm not promoting it. We sold out. We sold out at earldoesn'texist.com. My brand is named Exist. This is our first time selling out without any discounts. I was noticing that a lot of people were just waiting for the shirts to go on discount and then buying. No. This is our first time selling out full price, so I want to give a big thank you to all you guys that bought. And the day that it sold out, I was actually at a local fair and I saw a guy spray painting on t-shirts. So I asked him for a specific design, and it's the shirt I'm wearing right now, which is what I'm about to show you. It says Exist sold out. Woohoo! Yeah, so in case you guys didn't know, Daffy Duck is my favorite cartoon character of all time, and I thought it was so appropriate to wear this shirt for the ending of my Approached in Cartoon series. But yeah, with that being said, the way this video will be ordered won't be all of like racism approach and every single special needs approached. It'll be mixed in a pattern. So we'll keep it refreshing, and there won't be a proper outro for this video, so I'm gonna say goodbye right now. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Leave a like if you like the way I explain things. If you're not subscribed, I hope I can earn your subscription by the end of this video, and I will see you guys next time I upload. Tom and Jerry. I know you've watched Tom and Jerry at some point in your life, willingly or not. What a lot of people sitting through those episodes as kids didn't register though, is what took decades of formal complaints, edited broadcasts, and eventually an Amazon Prime content warning, is that the original series has a racism problem baked into its very first episode. Tom and Jerry launched at MGM in 1940, directed by William Hanna and Joseph Barbera. The first short, Puss Gets the Boot, introduces the formula everyone knows, but it also introduces a third character who would appear in 19 episodes across the next 12 years, a heavy-set black woman shown almost exclusively from the waist down, who serves as a housekeeper and authority figure in the home where Tom and Jerry live. The production team called her Mammy Two Shoes. The character was drawn directly from a deeply entrenched American stereotype, the Mammy archetype, which had been used in Hollywood films, advertising, and minstrel shows for decades to caricature black domestic workers as loud, servile, and comedic. Her design was explicitly modeled after Hattie McDaniel's role in Gone with the Wind, which had come out just a year earlier. Mammy Two Shoes speaks in exaggerated African-American vernacular English, misspells words in her own dialogue, and is consistently played as the butt of the joke. Her face was almost never shown. In the entire run of 19 episodes, it appeared only once, briefly, in Saturday Evening Puss. The camera stayed on her feet and lower body, reducing her to body parts rather than a full person. And beyond the visual framing, there were scenes where Dice falls out of her dress when Jerry shakes her down, where she sings about pork chops while doing the dishes, and where a cold delivery buries her, giving Tom a really awkward scene of him doing blackface. And sadly, you know those scenes where Tom and Jerry actually speak and it's pretty funny? This is clearly just using an accent making fun of black people. So it's pretty sad that a character that doesn't speak, one of the times that they made him speak was for racism. The NAACP began formally protesting the character as early as 1949, specifically after the re-release of the 1943 short, The Lonesome Mouse. By 1952, Lillian Randolph left the role to take a job on television, and Hanna-Barbera quietly retired the character. After 1954, the house had new owners, a young white couple named Joanne and George, but the erasure didn't stop there. When the original shorts resurfaced on television in the 1960s, studios began altering the character rather than acknowledging the problem. Chuck Jones, who took over the MGM animation studio, had the Mammy Two Shoes image redrawn frame by frame into a slim white woman with an Irish accent. The message being sent was less, "this is wrong," and more, "let's pretend this was always something else." When Turner Broadcasting acquired the rights in 1986, they kept Mammy's original design but redubbed the voice with actress Thea Vidal, stripping out the exaggerated dialect. Eventually, Cartoon Network and Boomerang banned the Mammy Two Shoes shorts from their American broadcast entirely. Loop on Disney. What if a 7-minute cartoon did more for autism representation than, I don't know, most feature-length films ever have? That's basically what happened when Pixar dropped Loop on Disney Plus on January of 2020. It was part of their Spark short series, a collection of experimental shorts made on smaller budgets with creative freedom that the main studio pipeline doesn't always allow. So here's how it goes. Renee is a 13-year-old black girl at an urban canoe camp, and she's non-speaking and autistic. She communicates through vocalizations, gestures, and a phone app that plays ringtones which she taps on repeatedly, using it as an auditory stim. When the film opens, she's already sitting in her canoe, calm, waiting, doing her thing. Then Marcus shows up late, gets paired with her by the camp counselor, and his first reaction is essentially, "that girl who doesn't talk?" It sounds bad, but it's actually a situation where there's a surprise first and then, understanding comes. Like, they figure each other out in real time. Renee notices some reeds by the side of the lake and keeps staring towards them, but Marcus has no idea what she wants. She eventually pulls up a poop emoji on her phone and points to some nearby restrooms, which Marcus reads as her needing to go poop. He paddles over, and the moment they get close enough to the shore, she reaches both arms and drags her hands through the reeds. That's what she wanted the whole time. Not the restroom, the reeds. She just needed to feel them. Marcus stands there for a second, confused, then sticks his own hand out and feels them too. That's the first real moment of connection in the film, and it happens without a single word. But it's not always so wholesome to watch. Like this scene where Marcus gets an idea and he paddles them into a large drainage tunnel so Renee's ringtone app will echo off the concrete walls. And at first, she loves it, the sound bouncing around her, the water reflecting rainbow light across the ceiling. Then a speedboat passes outside. The motor echoes through the tunnel and hits like a wall of noise. Renee panics immediately, grabs the paddle, and forces the canoe out of the tunnel so fast they crash onto the shore. She goes into full meltdown, throws her phone into the lake, hides under the flipped canoe, sobbing. Marcus, who has no framework of any of this, first tries grabbing her arm to calm her down. That makes it worse. Then he tries hovering over her, saying, "Stop crying, it's okay." Still worse. Eventually, he just backs off, he leaves a reed near the canoe, and he waits. And that, doing nothing except being present, is what finally helps her come back. Now, the thing about Loop that matters beyond the storytelling is how it was actually made. Pixar brought in consultants from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network to make sure Renee's portrayal was accurate, and they developed a specific gestural language for her, so that every behavior like covering her ears, poking her phone, or reaching for the reeds, carried a deliberate meaning. The voice behind Renee is Madison Bandy, who herself is autistic, and the recording team went to her home to do the audio sessions, specifically to make the process comfortable for her. Also, Renee is the first non-speaking autistic character in Pixar's history. And the choice to make her a black teenage girl matters too, because autism is statistically underdiagnosed in both women and people of color, so a character like Renee existing on screen, fully humanized, communicating on her own terms, pushes back against what the quote default image of autism has looked like in media for decades. Even the title is a nod to that. Loop is styled after the rainbow infinity symbol used by the neurodiversity movement. It only lasts for 7 minutes, it has no dialogue from the main character, and somehow it said more than most shows manage in entire seasons. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Episode 10. It's 1983, Saturday morning, cartoons are a religion, and He-Man and the Masters of the Universe is at the center of it. A muzzled prince on the planet Eternia lifts his sword, shouts "by the power of Grayskull," and becomes the most powerful man in the universe. Kids lost their minds because of it. Parents had more complicated feelings because the action was intense, the violence was constant, and parent groups were already lining up to complain. Filmation, the studio behind the show, had a solution. Every single episode would end with a character turning directly to the camera and delivering a moral lesson to the viewer. It became one of the show's most iconic signatures, and one of the most memorable of those lessons, and the episode that set it up, was about drugs. It was episode 10 of the first season, A Friend in Need. Tila's old friend Alina has come to visit the royal palace with her father Zikron, a scientist demonstrating a new invention, the transmutator. The two women go riding together, and a sorcerer named Jarvan attacks him in the geyser field, triggering the geysers to erupt. Tila gets knocked out in the chaos. Alina, standing right there, does nothing because she genuinely doesn't believe she has anything to offer. That feeling of inadequacy is the whole engine of what comes next. Jarvan sees it. After He-Man drives him off, Jarvan disguises himself as an old woman and approaches Alina in the forest alone. He gives her a ring to summon him and a potion that makes her feel strong, capable, fearless, everything she told herself she wasn't. And it works for a while. Then the potion runs out. And the moment it does, Alina crashes, shaking, weak, desperate for more, so she goes back. And goes back again. And the third time, Jarvan refuses to give her more unless she hands over the transmutator, her father's invention, which, of course, she does. That's an addiction handled in 18 minutes of 1983 Saturday morning animation. It shows the vulnerability, the first hit, the crash, the craving, and of course the compromise of values to get the next dose. Then He-Man turns to the camera. In today's story, Elena tried taking a magic potion which she thought would help her. Well, she found out there aren't any magic potions, and you know what? There aren't any magic drugs either. Anytime you take one from anybody but your parents or your doctor, you're taking a very big chance. You're gambling with your health, maybe even your life. Drugs don't make your problems go away, they just create more. Lynn Sr. and Rita Loud from The Loud House. So we're talking about The Loud House. Didn't know much about this show, and apparently has a really weird fan base. Hopefully that doesn't come out in this comment section. I don't think it would, but just wanted to make you guys aware that I'm aware. We're not talking about that part of the fan base. We're not talking about the fan base. Let's continue. So what if you had 11 kids and still somehow managed to make the one boy in the group feel like the odd one out? That's the situation at the center of The Loud House, a Nickelodeon show that premiered in 2016 about Lincoln Loud, the only son sandwiched between 10 sisters in a chaotic house in Royal Woods, Michigan. And his parents, Lynn Sr. and Rita Loud, are an interesting case because they're not cruel people. In fact, you could see that they genuinely love their kids. But loving 11 children and actually seeing each of them as individuals are two very different things. The pattern the show keeps returning to is a household where Rita and Lynn Sr. consistently let the kids work things out among themselves, even when those situations have clearly gone past the point where a parent should step in. In Brawl in the Family, when a massive fight breaks out between the sisters, Lynn Sr. actually asks Rita if they should get involved. Rita says no, it's better to let them sort it out, so they play puzzles instead. Meanwhile, the house is falling apart. That's a philosophy of parenting that can work sometimes, but when it's applied to 11 children with wildly different needs and personalities, it stops being hands-off parenting and starts being a household with no boundaries. A particular episode where all this is evident is No Such Luck, Season 2, Episode 8. It's one that makes the parents' failures the most impossible to ignore. It starts with Lynn Jr., the athlete of the family, losing a game and blaming Lincoln for being bad luck because he was in the stands. She threatens him with a baseball bat to make him attend her next game, then loses again and doubles down on the superstition. Lincoln, desperate for any personal time in a house where personal space barely exists, sees an opportunity and leans into it, pretending to be bad luck so his sisters will stop dragging him into every activity. It works until it doesn't. The sisters ban him from the house entirely, and even Lynn Sr. and Rita go along with all of it. Lincoln spends a night outside, his possessions get sold, and when he finally confesses and proves he was never actually bad luck, the family apologizes, and then makes him wear a squirrel mascot suit as a condition for coming back to activities. The apology lands as completely hollow because nothing actually changed. So what this episode actually put on the table, underneath the cartoon logic, is a real question about parenting in large families. When you're outnumbered and overwhelmed, which child gets overlooked? In The Loud House, the answer kept being the same one, and the parents never quite noticed they had a pattern. Teen Titans. Are you afraid of death? Well, what Teen Titans did with death and sacrifice across its 5 seasons went significantly further than most children's programming of the era was willing to go, and it did so without ever feeling like it was trying to be dark for the sake of it. The clearest example is Terra. She shows up in Season 2, a teenage girl with geokinetic powers, meaning she can move and manipulate earth and rock. She's a runaway with no control over her abilities, and when the Titans find her, they offer her something she's never had, a home. Beast Boy falls immediately in love with her. She's funny, warm, and genuinely trying. And she's also secretly working for Slade, feeding the team's plans to their most dangerous enemy. The Season 2 finale, Aftershock Part 2, is where all of it lands. Terra has been fighting against the Titans for weeks in Slade's armor, which has fused to her nervous system on a cellular level, meaning Slade can literally control her body from the inside. Beast Boy finds her underground and she begs him to destroy her because she can't do it herself. Instead, he tells her it's never too late to change. She turns on Slade, drives him into a lava pit, and then realizes her attack has triggered a volcanic eruption that will destroy the entire city. When Beast Boy tells her to run, she quotes his own words back at him and tells him she's the only one who can stop it. She absorbs the eruption into herself. Then she turns to stone. The last words to Beast Boy before she pushes him towards safety on a floating rock are, "You were the best friend I ever had." The next day, the Titans place a plaque at her statue. But the curious thing about this, the show doesn't resolve it cleanly. Years later in the series finale, things change. Beast Boy spots a girl who looks exactly like her at a high school, but without any powers or memories. He's trying everything to reach her. She tells him that the Terra he remembers was just a memory, and she wants to live a normal life. He lets her go. The show ends without ever confirming whether or not she was the real Terra. I think that's a representation of unresolved grief, and this refusal to tie it up is exactly what made it land. For a kid's cartoon though, I'm not sure the underlying message cuts through, but at least death isn't shown as brutal, just a character turning into a rock. Dr. Doofenshmirtz's accent in Phineas and Ferb. there's a really decent chance that the last cartoon villain you remember had an accent and not an American one. That is not a coincidence, and it's not a small thing. It's a pattern so deeply embedded in American children's animation that even a university made research on it. In fact, in their study of over 1,500 characters across 30 different children's shows, virtually none of the villains spoke with standard American English. Most heroes did, most villains didn't. Two characters that show up in that research were Scar from Disney's The Lion King and Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb. So, starting with Scar. The Lion King came out in 1994 and is set in the African savannah. Every character is a lion or other African animal. There is no logical reason within this world for any lion to have a British accent. And yet Scar, voiced by Jeremy Irons, speaks in crisp, received pronunciation, the poshest register of British English, while his brother Mufasa, voiced by James Earl Jones, speaks in a deep, authoritative American accent. Now you might be saying, Tuv, we really don't care about British people. I'm just kidding. No. Shout out all my British fans. But even those jokes, like, it's something so deeply rooted in our American culture that, like, British equals bad or, like, accent equals bad. And there is research about this. Villains always have some sort of accent, and the heroes always speaking perfect English. Maybe not as much anymore, but we already experienced them when we were kids, you know? It doesn't even make sense that they had different consonants in their mouths. And now, when you hear that, what you hear is that the intelligence and cunning went to the British accented character, while the exact opposite villain-like behavior went to the ethically coded ones. Now, fast forward to 2007, Phineas and Ferb premieres on Disney Channel, and its main villain is Dr. Doofenshmirtz, an incompetent evil scientist from the fictional European country of Jusselstein, which the show itself describes as a small Eastern European nation with Bavarian-style architecture, German food traditions, and a rural economy built partly around lawn gnomes. Doofenshmirtz speaks with a broad caricature of a German accent, voiced by co-creator Dan Povenmire. The show is self-aware enough to play him as lovably bumbling, rather than genuinely menacing, and that's part of what makes it interesting. He's sympathetic, even funny, but the underlying mechanism is identical. The character coded as the show's persistent antagonist is the one with a European accent. The heroes, Phineas and Ferb, are entirely American sounding. The one guy building innators to take over the tri-state area is from a made-up country that sounds German. Basically, accent equals danger, foreign equals suspect, and children are absorbing this as early as age 5, at which point accent is already influencing who they want to be friends with more than visual cues like skin color. Dopey from Snow White. It's 1937, and Disney is about to release its very first animated feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And right there, among the 7 little miners marching home singing Hi-Ho, is a character that a lot of people in the autism community have been talking about for decades. His name is Dopey. He's the youngest of the 7 dwarves, has no beard, he's completely bald with big floppy ears, and his purple cap almost swallowing his head. He doesn't talk. When Snow White first meets all 7 of them and Happy introduces him, he literally says, "This is Dopey. He don't talk none." Snow White asks if he's mute, Happy shrugs and says he just never tried. And that's it. So what does Dopey do to actually communicate? He whimpers, hiccups, gestures, uses his whole body, and the other dwarfs understand him just fine. Doc, who leads the group, can take whatever Dopey is blabbering and translate it into a clear sentence without missing a beat. There's a whole system there which I believe, like how we saw in the film Loop, is built on familiarity and patience. Only that in Snow White, I don't think we get an emphasis on the learning process Happy goes through to understand Dopey. Anyway, the group adapted to him, and that's definitely something, especially for 1937. But there's a deeper conversation, or analysis, or whatever you want to call it, sitting underneath all of this. During production, some of the animators of the film reportedly described Dopey's features in terms that were explicitly tied to intellectual disability, sort of framing his look and behavior in ways that reflected deeply problematic thinking of that era. His name alone, Dopey, is for an example one such blatant framing. Also, he's handed the simplest tasks at the mine, he's the one shoved towards danger first, and he's frequently the butt of the joke. The film loves him, but it also treats him as the group's most expendable. And yet, something unexpected has happened with Dopey over the years that nobody in that 1937 production room could have predicted. He became a point of genuine connection for families with nonverbal autistic children. Jeff Snyder, an autism self-advocate from Massachusetts who was himself nonverbal until age 4, built an entire public presentation around Disney characters and autism traits, and Dopey is one of his central examples. His point being that if you show a parent or a teacher a character like Dopey, someone who doesn't speak, who communicates through movement and sound, who is fully part of his community anyway, it gives them a framework for understanding a real child in their life. And that connection plays out in real life in ways that are hard to watch without feeling something. There's a video of a 2-year-old boy named Jack, nonverbal and autistic, at Walt Disney World. His mom Amanda had documented how he'd shield away from every character on the trip until he met Snow White. Here you can see it clearly. She treated him the way the dwarves treat Dopey, like someone whose way of being in the world is already enough. So Dopey, I would say, is a complicated case. The name, the framing, the era it came from, all that. Especially the part where it reflects deeper connections with real life, like in the case of that little boy. I mean, that's for sure meaningful and impactful for a cartoon. Galaxy High School Brain Blaster episode. So I'm going to assume most of you haven't even heard of Galaxy High School. It ran for exactly 13 episodes on CBS, premiering September 13th of 1986, and was gone before the year was out. It was created by Chris Columbus, the same writer who would later direct the first 2 Harry Potter films and Home Alone, and it was animated by TMS Entertainment, the same Japanese studio behind some of the most technically impressive animation of the era. And despite all of that, it only lasted 1 season. The premise was simple and genuinely fun. 2 Earth teenagers get accepted into an intergalactic high school on the asteroid Fludor. Doyle Cleverlobe is the popular jock on Earth who becomes a social outcast in space. Amy Brighthour is the shy, studious girl who suddenly finds herself thriving. It's a role reversal, fish out of water comedy, and it worked. But buried inside its single season is one episode that stood apart from everything else the show was doing. The Brain Blaster aired in 1986, and it's the reason the show was nominated for a Humanitas Prize, one of the most prestigious awards in children's television for humanizing content. So here's the setup. Doyle is failing his classes and risks being pulled from the Psych Hockey Championship, which in space high school terms is the equivalent of getting benched before the big game. An unsavory character named Punk McThrusters approaches him with an offer. The Brain Blaster, a headset that pumps knowledge and skills directly into your brain. The high is, well, very high. Doyle puts on the harness, the visuals go completely wild, he turns into a chicken, a dragon, fireworks, and when it's over, he can answer questions he had no business knowing. His grades skyrocket, and then the cycle starts. He needs more. He runs out of Buckazoids, the show's in-universe currency, and starts stealing from his friends to pay for the next hit. Amy's car disappears, other people's belongings go missing, he buys out Punk McThruster's entire supply, and has to travel to a dangerous planet to find a second dealer, nearly getting beaten up in a neighborhood he has no business being in. At one point, even Punk McThrusters tells him he's overdoing it, which the show actually uses as a deliberate beat, because it captures something real about how supply-side dealers will occasionally pump the brakes on a customer who's burning through product too fast to be sustainable. The show treats the first use as effective, pleasant, and then progressively harder to stop, which is a more honest portrayal of how dependency tends to develop than most kids' cartoons were willing to attempt at the time. But the resolution is messier than a clean moral lesson would allow. Doyle does get off the Brain Blaster, but he still has to pay for the 200 pizzas he promised his second dealer in exchange for his last hit, which means the show ends with the addict doing community service for a drug debt rather than the dealer facing any consequences. His friends get their stuff back, sort of, and at the end, Doyle looks at Amy and says he could have really messed up his brain for good. His friend, Bowie Bubblehead, immediately replies that he tried it once and nothing happened to him. And I'm pretty sure that the last part, the friend not feeling anything, is kind of a punchline that accidentally undermines the show's own message. Could be wrong though. The Littles, Prescription of Disaster. The Littles. It premiered on ABC in 1983, the same year He-Man was doing its drug PSA on the other side of the dial. The show was produced by DIC Entertainment. Yes, literally named Dick Entertainment. They could have picked anything else. Literally any other acronym. The French-American studio behind Inspector Gadget, and it ran for 3 seasons and 29 episodes. The premise came from a series of children's novels by John Peterson, tiny humanoid creatures with tails and pointed ears living inside the walls of a family home, invisible to almost everyone except one boy named Henry Big, who kept their existence a secret. It was warm, gentle, and designed for very young Saturday morning viewers. And Season 1, Episode 10, Prescription for Disaster, is one of the more quietly unsettling things to come out of early 80s children's animation. The Littles go to visit relatives for dinner. When they arrive, Cousin Minnie points out the apartment next door and the situation unfolding there. A girl named Angela, whose mother has been taking pills that have upended their lives entirely. The mother is checked out. She's dismissive of Angela, impatient, and not really present even though she's physically in the room. The pills aren't named. They look like ordinary prescription capsules. The show doesn't go into what they are or where they came from, which is part of what makes it strange for a preschool adjacent audience. The vagueness works, but it also means the episode is doing something bolder than most, showing the consequences of addiction on a family without a villain or a dealer or any of the external things that the He-Man and Galaxy High episodes used. There's just a mom, her pills, and a daughter who doesn't understand why her mother has become unreachable. Then Dinky accidentally gets involved. The mother drops a pill mid-dose and it falls through a vent into the walls where the Littles live, breaking open and spilling its contents into a pie that Dinky devours. What follows is played as comedy. Dinky hallucinates wildly, Grandpa chases him through the walls, trying to stop him from doing something dangerous, but the visual of a character experiencing an uncontrolled drug reaction while the adults around him scramble is doing something the episode probably didn't fully intend. It's showing what involuntary exposure to someone else's drugs look like from the inside. Dinky didn't choose this. He just happened to be in the wrong place when something spilled. Meanwhile, Angela has reached a breaking point. Her mother has been so absent, so unlike herself, that Angela starts to reason that if the pills are what help her mother function, maybe taking them herself will let her connect with her somehow. Fortunately, the littles catch on in time and intervene. They manipulate the situation so the mother believes she's hallucinating, which triggers enough alarms that she walks in on Angela about to take the pills. The episode's most poignant moment right there. A child is about to replicate what she watched her parents do for reasons that make complete sense to her. Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob SquarePants. Next on the bad parents list is Eugene H. Krabs, owner of the Krusty Krab, resident of Bikini Bottom, and one of the most consistently selfish parents in cartoon history. Except the show has always played it for laughs, so it kind of, snuck up on everyone. SpongeBob SquarePants has been on the air since 1999, and fun fact, I actually met Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, and got him to sign a frame cell, I think that's what they're called, at a convention last year. Just wanted to flex on y'all real quick. If you know how much it's worth, let me know. I don't think I'd ever sell it. I think I should frame it. But yeah, just pretty cool flex. So yeah, the show has been on the air since 1999, and for most of that run, Mr. Krabs' greed is treated as a personality quirk, a running gag. The thing is, he has a daughter. Pearl is a teenage sperm whale because her mother, who is never shown on screen and whose fate is never explained, was also a whale. Mr. Krabs raises her alone, and in the earlier seasons of the show, he actually does okay by her. There are episodes where he prioritizes Pearl over money, where his love for her is genuine and visible, but as the seasons went on and his greed got turned into something more extreme, Pearl became one of the clearest victims of it. The show essentially built a pattern where the same man, who would do anything for $1, couldn't bring himself to spend one on his own kid. The episode that makes that really clear is season 4's Whale of a Birthday, which aired in 2006. Pearl is turning 16, but she has sat through 15 birthday parties already. Every single one is a disaster because her father cut every corner possible. At one of her earlier parties, all the guests, every child there, had to share a single balloon. So Pearl comes to her father before this one and makes him promise not to be a cheapskate, at least not this time. And he agrees. She hands him a long list of everything she wants, and the list literally unrolls out of the Krusty Krab door and down the street. Mr. Krabs then sends SpongeBob to shadow Pearl at the mall with his credit card because he genuinely planned to buy her things while he handles the party himself. And then it goes predictably wrong. SpongeBob dutifully buys everything Pearl points at, and Mr. Krabs, back at the Krusty Krab, quietly reverts to form. When Pearl arrives, the banner on the wall is recycled from her own baby shower and says "It's a boy" with the last word crossed out and "girl" written above it in marker. The refreshments are stale popcorn, dishwater to drink, and a birthday cake made out of cardboard and frosting. The ice sculpture is 400 pounds of raw Krabby Patty meat, and Squidward performs a song called "Fourply." If you're a real one, you know that song was actually a hit. Pearl stands there in her party dress in front of all her friends and falls apart. SpongeBob eventually saves the party by arriving with a truckload of everything Pearl had pointed at in the mall, including her favorite boy band, Boys Who Cry, performing live, which, per Squidward, charges $1 million just to show up. Mr. Krabs sees the bill and nearly collapses, but Pearl is happy, so he lets it go. And that's kind of the whole story of Mr. Krabs as a father. It always takes someone else stepping in before he does right by her. He loves her, that part seems real, but in a household where money is the one constant priority, Pearl keeps coming in second. Adventure Time. The thing is that most cartoons, when they deal with death, if at all they do, they treat it as something final. You know, like a character is dead and that's the end of it. However, Adventure Time spent 10 seasons doing something totally different. Death in this show is more like a place. And the way the show built its afterlife across episodes, across seasons, and ultimately across its Distant Land special, Together Again, is pretty impressive. The first major hint comes in season 4's The New Frontier. Jake has a croak dream, in Adventure Time lore, a dream involving the cosmic owl which predicts the dreamer's death. Jake wakes up and tells Finn about it. His reaction isn't panic, it's something more like a calm acceptance. I think even a kind of excitement about what's coming. Finn, who loves Jake more than anything, doesn't take this well. He wants to fight it and prevent it, or at least outrun it. And Jake's response, essentially "do just accept it," is the show quietly introducing the idea that peace with death is wisdom. The show also treats death as a character, not a concept. Death first appears in Death in Bloom, where Finn challenges him to a musical battle to reclaim a soul. Death isn't frightening, he's a musician with a personality doing his job. The show keeps doing this across multiple appearances, giving Death a face, a sense of humor, a schedule. When you can picture Death as someone who plays bass and has opinions, it loses most of its terror. I guess that's intentional and the whole point, and it runs through the whole series. Together Again, which aired on HBO Max in May of 2021, as part of Distant Lands, brings all of it home. The special opens with a fake-out episode and then reveals that Finn has died of old age, presumably, decades after the show's original timeline, and has woken up in the afterlife. His first priority is finding Jake, who died before him. They even had a secret code they developed together in case they ended up dead and separated. The afterlife itself, the Dead Worlds, is structured in ascending levels, to something equivalent to Hell at the first level, to pure serenity at the 50th. Jake, being Jake, made it all the way to level 50. When Finn finally reaches him, Jake has achieved something close to nirvana, free from all desire, existing in complete peace. And when Finn asks to be reincarnated and go back, Jake abandons his paradise without hesitation to join him because another adventure with Finn was worth more than bliss alone. I don't know, a rather interesting portrayal of the concept of death for kids. Song of the South. There's a Disney film most people under 40 have never seen, and Disney intends to keep it that way. Song of the South premiered on November 12th of 1946 at the Fox Theater in Atlanta. Walt Disney gave his introductory remarks to the crowd and then quietly slipped away before the film started. He was notoriously sensitive to criticism, and he already knew what was coming. The star of the film, James Baskett, wasn't there at all. Guess why? Because Atlanta was a racially segregated city, and he couldn't find a hotel that would take him. That detail right there, the lead actor of your film being barred from his own premiere because of his race, tells you most of what you need to know about the world Song of the South was made in, and what it was made of. The film is a live-action and animated hybrid set in post-Civil War Georgia. A 7-year-old white boy named Johnny goes to stay at his grandmother's plantation where he befriends Uncle Remus, an elderly black worker played by James Baskett, who tells him folktales about Brother Rabbit, Brother Fox, and Brother Bear. The animated sequences built around those tales are, well, really good for 1946. They're fluid, inventive, and visually rich. Zip-a-Dee-Doo-Dah, performed by Baskett, won the Academy Award for the Best Original Song that year, so the animation wasn't the problem. The problem was everything built around it. The plantation is depicted as a warm, harmonious place. Uncle Remus exists almost entirely to serve Johnny's emotional needs. He is cheerful, deferential, and endlessly patient with a child who has known him for about a week. The NAACP, after seeing the film at a press screening, described it as containing all the cliches in the book, from the exaggerated southern dialect to a portrayal of post-slavery black life that read as dangerously glorified picture of the plantation. Congressman Adam Clayton Powell Jr. called it an insult to American minorities. Disney re-released the film 5 times in theaters, most recently in 1986. The Splash Mountain ride, which opened at Disneyland in 1989 and Walt Disney World in 1992, used the Brother Rabbit animated segments as its entire theme. It ran for over 30 years. The ride closed in 2023 and reopened in 2024 as Tiana's Bayou Adventure, based on The Princess and the Frog. Zip-a-Dee-Doo-Dah was quietly removed from Disney park parades around the same time. As of today, Song of the South has never been released on Disney+. CEO Bob Iger has called it not appropriate in today's world. The film will enter the American public domain in 2042, at which point Disney's ability to control who sees it ends. Until then, the studio who made it is the same one working hardest to make sure you can't. Bluey, ADHD. It's the morning commute to school, and there's this kid who can't sit still in the back seat. He's fidgeting, bouncing around, and of course, he's forgotten his hat. Again, his dad, clearly frustrated but trying to keep it together, asks, "What are we gonna do with you, Jack?" And that's how we meet Jack Russell in Bluey's Season 2 episode Army. The show never once says the word ADHD, or even words would consider, alternatives to ADHD. But if you're watching it, especially if you've got ADHD yourself, or raising a kid with it, you know exactly what you're looking at. Classic ADHD. Now, Jack's a kid who just switched schools, and right from the start, his little sister reports, aka rats on him, to the teacher. He can't sit still, can't remember anything. The thing is, Jack knows it too. When his new friend Rusty asks why he switched schools, Jack doesn't even try to make excuses. He says, "I'm not good at doing what I'm told. I can't sit still, and I can't remember anything, like numbers or letters or my hat." And that line for sure, at least for me, says everything. Because Jack doesn't say that there's anything wrong with him. He just elaborates. The show lets him explain what he struggles with in a plain and simple way without turning it into some tragic backstory, which is what I guess some other approaches of such a disability would do. Anyway, so the teacher, Calypso, goes on to do something brilliant. Instead of trying to force Jack to sit at a desk or follow traditional classroom rules, she points him toward Rusty, this kid who's obsessed with playing army games. Rusty gets it and turns out to be super helpful. He creates this structured, imaginative game where Jack has to remember hand signals, learn location names for helicopter evacuations, and take turns on sentry duty. And within this game, Jack thrives. The structure of the army gives him something to focus on, and suddenly he's remembering everything, following orders perfectly. The episode is narrated entirely from Jack's perspective. We're inside his head as he recounts his day in incredible detail, which, by the way, seems to be accurate because apparently people with ADHD can hyperfocus and be incredibly detailed when they're interested in something. But we also see where he struggles. There's this moment when they're on patrol and a bush turkey appears, and Jack gets completely distracted. The episode even touches on the hereditary aspect of ADHD. In later episodes like Explorers, we see Jack's dad getting lost on the way to pick him up, struggling with navigation and focus in ways that mirror Jack's own challenges. I mean, it's subtle, but it's there. At the end of the day, Rusty gives Jack a tube of condensed milk, a gift from Rusty's military dad who's currently deployed. He tells Jack he's good at playing army and promotes him to private. And Jack, who started the day being told he can't do anything right,
goes home and tells his mom the entire story in perfect detail. His confidence is completely transformed. But what makes this representation groundbreaking, I think, is what it doesn't do. 1, it doesn't make Jack super inspirational in any unrealistic way. 2, it doesn't make him overcome his ADHD through sheer willpower. That would be unrealistic, right? And 3, it definitely doesn't reduce ADHD to cheap jokes. Instead, it shows a kid who struggles with certain things but excels at others. You know, a balance. It demonstrates that sometimes kids just need a different approach, a way of learning that works with their brain, not against it. Jack appears in multiple episodes after this, and each time, the show reinforces that he's just a regular kid with friends who accept him. No special treatment, and neither is there constant explaining. He's part of the group. And for parents and kids watching who deal with ADHD every day, seeing that kind of representation, seeing a character who's allowed to just exist and be loved and be good at things must for sure hit different. An addictive drug called Bliss, Captain Planet and the Planeteers, Season 2, Episode 3. There's this 1991 episode of Captain Planet that probably traumatized an entire generation of kids. It's called Mind Pollution. The episode opens with this blonde guy named Boris already in trouble. He's alone in a new city, struggling to make friends, and that's where this rat man, Verminous Scum, yes, that is his name, I'm not just calling him that. That's when Verminous Scum shows up. He's a villain who represents the idea of urban areas experiencing degradation and disease, and in this episode, he's selling a designer drug called Bliss, and of course, Boris is buying it. The drug promises that all the problems will go away once he tries it, which he does. He takes one pill and starts laughing. And among other things, we see his face look worse than before. It's sort of skinnier and withered. You know, like how when plants lack water? In the scene, we then cut back to Linka and the rest. Turns out Boris is her cousin, and she's heading to Washington, D.C. to see him. Time passes, and it gets dark, and Boris is already hooked when Linka arrives. I mean, he's totally wasted. He looks really ill, but he tries to hide it. He says it's because he's getting over a cold. I mean, yeah, bro. Yeah, totally. Then upstairs, he takes another pill. His Uncle Dimitri, is also worried about him, but his worry is because he's acting moody, stays out late, doesn't see his friends anymore. The next morning, Boris appears, looking completely renovated. Linka, however, notices a cut on his forehead. When she tries to clean it, Boris snaps and knocks the rubbing alcohol onto the stove. Later, while biking to a cafe, Boris asks about Linka's power ring and offers her, quote, one of these, pulling out the pills. Linka's instantly outraged. They wrestle for the bag, it splits, and the pills disappear down a drain. Boris calls her a stupid cow and rides away through traffic. Now, up to that point, you can sort of get the idea of how the show is trying to portray drug addiction, highlighting how addiction destroys people and can harm the people around them. Boris returns to Scum, the dealer, desperate, in agony, begging for more. No surprise there, but then this time, the price has gone up. So what does Boris do next? Well, he offers to steal Linka's ring. Scum wants something better though. He wants Linka herself, promising Boris enough bliss to last the rest of his life. Boris refuses at first, saying he loves his cousin, but Scum points out that Boris will continue suffering without the pills. Boris caves. I mean, he's addicted at this point. He comes home, tells Linka he stopped using, then gives her a Blintz with bliss pills hidden inside. She eats it completely unaware, and it transforms her completely into this red-eyed girl. The way they show that you're on the drug, you're addicted to the drug in the show, is by giving them red irises. I'll spare you the step-by-step details, and so, to run through what happens next quickly, when these guys known as Planeteers arrive in Washington, after Guy warns them of the cities being overrun by bliss addicts, they find Linka wasted at the Lincoln Memorial. Scum, the dealer guy, drags her out of a zombie-like crowd, hands her a pill, and she takes it instantly. She's mumbling about needing more, accusing her teammates of trying to bring her down. It's too late at this point, she's hooked. Then Boris appears at a window, begging Linka to let him in. Wheeler, one of the Planeteers, slams it shut, but Boris throws himself through the glass anyway, and now he's bleeding bad. Then, on the Capitol roof, Scum throws a bottle of bliss down. I mean, talk about a dealer hellbound getting everyone hooked. Boris catches the bottle, downs half the pills in one go, Linka grabs the rest. And just like that, Boris collapses. G, another Planeteer, checks his pulse and tells Linka that bliss has killed him. Only after seeing her cousin dead does Linka find the strength to throw the remaining pills away and help summon Captain Planet. It all ends with her lying on a stretcher at a medical camp going through a really bad withdrawal. Now, I don't know, but to me, the show portrayed forced addiction, the physical deterioration, the emotional manipulation addicts use, the deadly consequences, and the agonizing road to recovery in a rather direct way, at least for kids, and did it all in 23 minutes. Also, the fact that they got one of their main characters addicted. They didn't just get a one-off character, get them addicted, and move on. They actually got one of the main cast addicted, which I really respected. It showed how they can not only take drugs in the first place, but accidentally or maliciously through someone else get hooked, and how it really warps your perception. And also the fact that withdrawals exist. I actually really ended up liking this one. Let's head on to the next one. Boris and Doris from Caillou. For this entry, we have a show that ran for over 20 years on public television, and by the time it ended, I believe the loudest reaction from some parents was relief. We're talking about Caillou. This Canadian animated series that premiered on PBS in September of 2000 ran for 5 seasons and was actually pulled from the network on January 5th of 2021. When PBS Kids made the announcement, the parents I just mentioned responded by celebrating because it was, quote, teaching their kids bad habits. Now, fair or not, that's the reputation the show built. And a lot of it traces directly back to Boris and Doris, Caillou's parents, referred to throughout the series only as Daddy and Mommy, and the specific way they handled their 4-year-old son's behavior across hundreds of episodes. Caillou is a preschooler, so tantrums and emotional outbursts are developmentally normal. That part, child development experts would tell you, is fair to portray. The issue critics kept pointing to wasn't what Caillou did, it was what Boris and Doris consistently did in response, which was essentially nothing. Across the original run of the show, Doris and Boris almost never set consequences. When Caillou whined until he got what he wanted, he got what he wanted. When he talked back, they would talk back softly. When he refused to share with his little sister Rosie, the moment would usually pass without any real intervention. Personally, my mom hated this show. She did not like this kid at all. I used to love the show, I guess. I don't even remember watching it. Obviously, I was like 2. But she described him as like a crybaby child that was just annoying. The pattern was so consistent that PBS eventually pulled 11 episodes from the air in 2006, all because the behavior on screen was considered too disruptive a model for the preschool audience the school was explicitly targeting. One of the banned episodes, Big Brother Caillou, contained a scene where Caillou physically hurts his newborn sister Rosie. Boris stops it, which is one of the rare moments of actual parental intervention in the series, but the fact that it happened at all in a show aimed at toddlers prompted enough backlash that PBS and PBS Kids Sprout pulled it from rotation until 2007. In another episode, Boris takes both kids along to buy a surprise gift for Doris and tells him directly, "This is our little secret. You know how to keep secrets, right?" Yeah, I know, sounds really bad. I mean, it ran entirely against what parents were teaching their kids about safety and transparency with adults. The irony is that Caillou started from a piece of good intentions, trying to show a child's emotional world honestly. But somewhere in that execution, Boris and Doris became a case study in what happens when a show forgets that the parent's response is just as much a lesson as the child's behavior. Tiny Toon Adventures, 1 beer. We need to talk about a cartoon episode that aired once, got banned, and has lived in internet infamy ever since. Tiny Toon Adventures, the Warner Brothers animated series that ran from 1990 to 95, was produced by Steven Spielberg and featured younger versions of classic Looney Tunes characters attending Acme University. It was fast, funny, and generally pretty harmless. And then season 3 aired an episode called Elephant Issues on September 18th of 1991. The episode is broken into 3 segments. The first 2 are standard kids territory content. The third one is 1 beer, and it opens with Buster Bunny literally turning to the camera, growing a pair of devil horns and announcing, "In this episode, we're showing the evils of alcohol." That's how self-aware the whole thing is. Buster finds a single bottle of beer in a refrigerator and pressures his friends Plucky Duck and Hampton J. Pig into trying it with him. 1 sip each, and all 3 are immediately drunk. 5 o'clock shadows, hobo clothes, rhythmic burping in unison. They stumble to Acme University, where their friends recoil from their breath. Then Plucky spots a police car with the key still in the ignition, so they steal it. They drive past a sign that reads "Now leaving reality," up a mountain labeled Death Mountain, through a danger road out ahead, barrier, and straight off the edge. The car crashes into a graveyard and lands directly on a tombstone. The beer bottle flies out of the wreck completely unbroken. The 3 of them die, their souls rise as angels, and they float up towards heaven. At which point they stop, turn to the camera, remove their angel costumes, and Buster says, "I hope the kids got the message. So do we do a funny episode tomorrow?" Hampton replies, "I hope so." Then the segment ends just like that. The entire sequence is deliberately over the top because it's a parody of 80s and early 90s anti-drinking PSAs, the same ones that showed skeletons driving into intersections and melting glasses. The show probably knew exactly what it was doing, but the fact that the main characters actually died on screen, even in a clearly staged satirical context, was enough for a ban. Static Shock, Season 1, Episode 8, Sons of the Fathers. Static Shock aired on Kids WB in late 2000. It ran for 4 seasons, and the show was about Virgil Hawkins, a 14-year-old boy who contracted superpowers after exposure to a mutagen gas, those being electromagnetic powers which he would use for the sake of good under his alias Static. The show follows the adventure he and his best friend Richie Foley get into, which involved helping Dakota City for the greater good. It's your typical children's superhero show, to say the least. However, one thing the show was praised for was its approach to social issues. In Season 1, Episode 8, Sons of the Fathers, we get a look as to how the directors wanted to communicate that racism is not only a systemic, old-fashioned problem, but also that it's just wrong. The episode starts off with a group of villains known as the Metabreed invading the local mall and robbing innocent civilians. Then Static comes through to save the day, yada yada yada. You know, it's always funny when heroes wear an eye mask and still aren't recognized. Like, Bro, do you even know your son's face or voice? Anyway, that's not the point. A little argument ensues between Richie and Virgil's sister, Sharon. She complains that he's there every day, so much so that he should be paying rent. Virgil defends him and says Richie is welcome to their home any day of the week. Shortly after this, time passes and Virgil says, you know what? My sister's right. We never hang out at your place. And Richie panics, looking for excuses, but doesn't have any. So they agree that on Friday, Virgil can spend the night. We also have a meta-breed subplot going on in the episode, which I'm not going to get too into. Friday night comes along and Virgil and Richie are hanging out in his room, and it seems Richie planned to specifically invite Virgil when his dad wasn't home, and instead working a night shift. It seems the mom was also in on it too. But then, the living room door opens and it's revealed Mr. Foley is home early. Virgil says hi and Mr. Foley ignores him. Then they have an awkward, quiet dinner. You know those awkward dinners where you only hear the forks clanking? I fucking hate those moments. Virgil breaks the silence by telling Richie he brought a rap CD they can listen to later, and Mr. Foley intervenes, saying rap music is garbage and disrespectful. He also says it, quote, tears down everything guys like me built, insinuating, you know, that he's a white man and people that listen to rap most likely aren't. Eventually, Virgil is making his way to the bathroom through the hallway and overhears Mr. Foley talking to Richie's mother, saying, and I quote, and now I see why Richie acts like a hood, Maggie. That kid's a bad influence. All his kind are. It's bad enough I gotta deal with them all day long. Now one of them's in my house. And as any normal human would, Virgil leaves. Shout out Richie for writing for his homeboy though, because he straight up calls his dad out for being racist and tells him he hates him.
Well, you got what you wanted, Dad. My best friend's gone because of you and your stupid racism. I hate you!
The day after, Virgil gets a phone call from Maggie, Richie's mom, explaining that Richie is missing. She also apologizes, and we can see that the only racist in the house is Mr. Foley. Then we get to see Richie get chased by an armadillo man and a wolf man. Okay, we also get to see Mr. Foley ask Virgil's father for help in a very obnoxious way. He says Richie never mentioned Virgil and his family were black. As annoyed as Mr. Hawkins is, he's still willing to help track down Richie. They have a discussion about what was said that previous night where Mr. Hawkins confronts Foley. He calls him an ignorant bigot that's blind to the world moving forward. He also says Richie doesn't like his own dad, and because of that, he'll never truly get to have a good relationship with his own son. Then he says, Richie ran away from you a long time ago, and who can blame him?
Richie ran away from you a long time ago, Foley. And who can blame him?
Damn! Okay. Long story short, a fight breaks out between the villains and the dads trying to save Richie, though are incapable of doing so. Then Static comes in to save the day, and Mr. Foley is extremely grateful that his son was saved by, you know, a black superhero. The episode ends with Mr. Foley, Virgil, and Richie all heading to Comic-Con, and the father's attitude is noticeably different, treating Virgil as he would anyone else. I really like how the directors chose to make the dad being racist just as big a problem as supervillains, and they don't shove it in your face either. It was genuinely a good life lesson that was approached in a calmly and mature manner. I see why the show was heavily praised. Dwayne McDuffie, one of the two creators of the original Static Shock comics, focused heavily on giving minorities an important role in pieces of media. Fun fact, since we're talking about Static Shock, they actually had a gun PSA and a dyslexia PSA. In the dyslexia one, they tell kids to not be afraid to tell an adult if they're having trouble reading, and they're no less than anyone else. And the gun PSA is a bit more morbid, showing a little girl placing a rose on a tombstone.
Casa Grandes, Down syndrome. Now here's something you might not expect from a kids cartoon. In the Casa Grandes, a Nickelodeon show that premiered in 2019, there's this character named Carlos CJ Casagrande Jr. He's 13 years old, he's got Down syndrome, and the show does a great job treating him like what he is, a regular member of the family. I mean, CJ wasn't created as some special episode character who shows up to teach a lesson and then disappears. He's actually one of the main characters, the second oldest kid in the Casagrande family and cousin to the show's protagonist. And he's voiced by Jared Kozak, who has Down syndrome himself, which was a pretty big deal since Kozak became the first Nickelodeon actor with Down syndrome in a major role. Now here's where the show gets it right. CJ's portrayed as this incredibly perceptive kid who often notices things before anyone else in his family does. Like there's moments where the whole family's distracted with their own stuff, and CJ's the first one to spot when visitors arrive. Or when his cousin Ronnie Ann's standing under a wobbly air conditioning unit about to fall, CJ's the one who realizes the danger first. The show makes this point repeatedly. He's observant, he's aware, he contributes, but the really interesting part is how his storylines work. Take the episode R in the Family from 2019. This whole episode centers on CJ's obsession with pirates, and I mean the kid loves pirates. Dresses up as one, talks like one, the whole thing. So when there's this pirate dinner theater show happening, CJ's determined to get on stage and raise the Jolly Roger flag. And what does the show do? It has him compete for that honor, fighting against another kid named Ralphie, and CJ actually knocks him off the deck to win. The episode's about his passion, his determination, and also how that reflects his victory. It's earned, not handed over. Then there's Shortcut from 2021, which reveals something unexpected.
CJ's an incredible hairstylist. His sister Carlotta's working at a salon and completely bombing at cutting hair, giving these disastrous haircuts to customers. She turns to CJ for training because apparently he's been the family's secret barber master this whole time. The episode shows him styling hair in the dark, just effortlessly creating these perfect cuts. By the end, the salon owner actually hires him to work because he's that skilled. See, what makes this representation work is that CJ's disability isn't ignored, but it's also not his entire personality. He's shown with the characteristics associated with Down syndrome, his speech has rhoticism, he's shorter than other 13-year-olds, he's got that childlike enthusiasm, but the show also gives him depth. He runs a yearly Thanksgiving canned food drive for charity, works at the family's bodega when they need help competing against a rival store. Even when he's exhausted, he's protective of his family, talented in unexpected ways, and treated with genuine respect by everyone around him. The family dynamics are what really sells it though. His grandmother Rosa treats him like any other grandkid. She'll boss him around, ask him for help, and rely on him. His siblings joke with him, play with him, and yeah, sometimes get annoyed with him like, siblings do. The show creates this environment where CJ's just there, living his life, having his own storylines that aren't about teaching lessons to others. He's a kid who loves pirates, happens to be amazing at cutting hair, notices things other people miss, and has Down syndrome.
Cartoon All-Stars to the rescue. One of one crossover episode. Picture this, it's April 21st, 1990, and almost every single major TV network in America is airing the same thing at the same time. I'm talking ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, even cable channels like Nickelodeon. And before the show even starts, you've got President George Bush and Barbara Bush introducing it. What could possibly warrant this level of coordination? Well, how about a half-hour cartoon about drug addiction featuring Bugs Bunny, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, well, only Mikey, and Winnie the Pooh? And those are just some notable names. They got like Avengers. They had the most popular 80s characters. Yes, I know this dropped in 1990, but these characters got famous actually way before that. But, they had a cool 80s run. That's how I'm say it. They literally got their own version of the Avengers just to talk about drug addiction, which I'm not mad at. So this was a response to drug use being off the charts at the time. Crack cocaine was an actual epidemic in the late 80s and 90s. So this special, meant to be as part of the greater effort to dissuade people from drugs, opens in 9-year-old Corey's bedroom where someone's stealing her piggy bank. Papa Smurf witnesses the theft from inside a comic book and alerts the other cartoon characters hiding in the room. Alf in a picture frame, Garfield as the lamp, even the chipmunks are there. They all track down the thief and discover it's Michael, Corey's older brother. When Simon opens a box under Michael's bed, he identifies its contents, marijuana.
My guess would be marijuana, an unlawful substance used to experience artificial highs.
And yes, it is pretty odd hearing a chipmunk from Alvin and the Chipmunks say marijuana. Just like it's also weird hearing Bugs Bunny say a joint. The next scene is Michael smoking with his friends and this character called Smoke, a cloud who represents addiction itself, and he's about to try the white powder. But then sirens blare and he runs into an alley where he meets Bugs Bunny disguised as a cop. Bugs traps Smoke in a garbage can and uses a time machine borrowed quote from some coyote to show Michael how his addiction started. The flashback reveals Michael was pressured by older kids 2 years earlier, and he admits he did it because he didn't want them to think he was a wimp. Back in the present, Michael's considering trying crack cocaine. One of his friends steals his wallet and runs, and Michael chases after her until he falls down a manhole with Smoke. There he meets Michelangelo, Baby Kermit, Baby Miss Piggy, and Baby Gonzo, who take him on a roller coaster ride through a drug-inflicted human brain. When it's over, Michael realizes they've been touring it in his own brain, and they're currently inside of him. And like the last one, I must say that the approach here is pretty direct. So after the roller coaster, Huey, Dewey, and Louie meet Michael and ask why he didn't just say no. He claims he didn't want to, but they suspect it's because he doesn't know how. So they teach him a song about the wonderful ways to say no. Michael wakes up thinking it was all a nightmare. When Corey tries talking to him about his problem, he snaps, shoves her against the wall, and threatens her against telling their parents. She runs out frightened. That's when Smoke appears, claiming Michael did the right thing. Michael stares into a mirror in his marijuana box, and Alf pulls him through into a hall of mirrors, showing him two reflections, how he looks now, and an aged corpse-like version of himself if he doesn't stop taking drugs. I mean, it's actually pretty dark. They didn't hold back. You could see him like on an operating table with a syringe next to him, and he looks like a zombie. Smoke finds Corey alone and tempts her to try Michael's drugs. He suggests that if she does what Michael does, maybe they could quote be friends again. Michael bursts back into his bedroom just in time to stop Corey from using the drugs herself. There's a conversation about asking their parents for help on this matter, and the special ends with all the cartoon characters appearing on a poster. Again, a very direct approach to addiction with lessons on what goes on around the addiction itself, starting from peer pressure all the way to consequences. That's what 90s kids watched on TV as a campaign against drugs. All parents from Rugrats. Rugrats premiered on Nickelodeon in August of 1991, and for most of the decade, it was one of the highest rated children's shows on television. The premise of it was just a group of babies and toddlers interpreting the world around them through their own wild, imaginative lens.
going on adventures, solving problems, defeating monsters that are usually just vacuum cleaners or shadows on the wall. It's honestly funny, sweet, and creative. It's also, if you watch as an adult, a sort of horrifying portrayal of some of the most checked out parents in the history of animated shows, well, except for the animated adult shows like Family Guy, South Park, etc. The reason I say that is because the entire engine of the show depends on the adults never paying attention. And rather interestingly, each set of parents fails differently. I mean, that's what makes Rugrats more exciting to watch. Let's start with Stu and Dee Dee Pickles, parents of Tommy and Dill. Stu is a toy inventor who works out of the family basement, which means he's technically home all day, and also somehow never aware that his 1-year-old has escaped his playpen and is currently exploring the garage, the backyard, the neighborhood, or once the inside of a parked RV. Also, it's funnily strange that his inventions are supposed to be designed with children in mind, but they're consistently terrifying, they're loud, malfunction all the time, and are capable of causing genuine panic. Dee Dee, meanwhile, has outsourced her parenting philosophy almost entirely to a self-help author. Her constant touchstone is Dr. Lifshitz, a child psychologist whose tapes, books, and phone hotlines she quotes as gospel, right up until an episode where they actually meet him and it becomes obvious he knows nothing about children. So yeah, so far these are two parents who are present and still somehow never actually parenting their kid the right way. Then there's Charlotte Pickles, CEO of her own corporation, perpetually on her cell phone, and the mother of Angelica. Charlotte loves her daughter, but the phone is essentially welded to her ear. She shows up at family events already mid-conversation with her assistant Jonathan and leaves still talking. I don't know, but I feel like she's sort of the version of parental absence the 90s was most afraid of. You know, the working mother who succeeded professionally and kinda paid for it at home. Except the show complicates that perspective because Drew Pickles, Angelica's father and a present attentive accountant, is a stacked contrast. He has his own failure mode. He is so terrified of Angelica not loving him that he cannot say no to her. He buys her new toys nearly every day, lets her use his designer ties as jump ropes, feeds her junk food for dinner multiple times a week, and collapses whenever she cries that she doesn't love him anymore. Angelica ends up alone with her doll Cynthia, bossing around babies half her age because she doesn't get reliable time from either parent. Just as we saw with Helga, the bullying, the manipulation, etc., it's all rather clear once you see what she's working with at home. The one family that functions differently are the Carmichaels. Randy and Lucy Carmichael are present, warm, and actually engaged with their daughter Susie, which is actually why Susie is the only kid in the group who doesn't need Tommy's leadership to feel okay in the world. She's confident, kind, and sort of unafraid. And maybe it's the show's way to say, the kids who know their parents seem to turn out differently than the ones who aren't sure. I actually love this one a lot because it has both contrasts of what a failed parent might look like versus what a great parent looks like. Sesame Street. Farewell, Mr. Hooper. The common conception, or misconception if you think about it, is that you're not supposed to talk about death on children's TV. In practice, most shows would avoid it, maybe say the character moved away or just quietly recast the role, but in 1983, Sesame Street did something completely different, something that's still considered one of the most powerful moments in television history. On December 7th of 1982, actor Will Lee, who'd played Mr. Hooper since the show's premiere in 1969, died of a heart attack at 74. He'd been one of the original 4 human characters, the gruff but warm-hearted owner of Hooper Store, where all the Muppets and kids would gather. Now here's the thing, when you work at the same place for such a long time, especially when the work is this wholesome and full of heart, the cast becomes a family. And I don't mean that in the corporate feel-good sense. For these people, Mr. Hooper really was one of them. So the producers faced a choice. They could have easily said Mr. Hooper, moved to Florida or recasted the role, but executive producer Dulcie Singer said if we left it unsaid, kids would notice. After consulting with child psychologists, child development experts, and even religious advisors, they made a bold decision. They'd have the character die too, and use it to teach children about the concept of death without being traumatized by it. Episode 1839 aired on Thanksgiving Day, 1983. That day was specifically chosen so parents would be home to answer any questions their kids might have. The episode starts normally, just a typical day on Sesame Street. Big Bird's been drawing pictures of all his friends and he's handing them out, excited to share his artwork with everyone. He gives his portraits to Luis, Susan, Gordon, Bob, Maria, David, and Olivia. But then he's got one left, a drawing of Mr. Hooper. Big Bird looks around. Say, where is he? That's when Maria says it. Big Bird, don't you remember we told you? Mr. Hooper died. He's dead. Yeah, it was that direct. But then Big Bird, in this perfect childlike way, responds saying that he'll give it to him when he comes back, because that's exactly how a kid would think. The adults have to explain, using the word dead repeatedly, that Mr. Hooper isn't coming back. Ever. And Big Bird's next question is exactly what child development experts predicted. Who's going to make my birdseed milkshakes? It sounds selfish, but preschoolers are naturally self-centered. They're really asking, who's gonna take care of me? So, did it work? The research department conducted studies before and after the episode aired. They found that 73% of 4 and 5-year-olds understood Mr. Hooper was dead, and 88% of that group understood he wasn't coming back. Only about a quarter of 3-year-olds got it, but that's developmentally expected. Most importantly, 80% of kids stayed attentive throughout. Half of the parents reported discussing death with their children after watching. and critically, none reported negative reactions from their kids. Maybe that's why the Daytime Emmys later selected it as one of the 10 most influential moments in daytime television history. That's So Raven, Season 3, Episode 10. True Colors. That's So Raven aired on Disney Channel for 4 seasons from 2003 to 2007. It was about a teenage girl, Raven, dealing with the average problems of the youth. But there was a twist. She could see into the future. I always personally thought that was a little bit corny, but the show was a huge success, so fuck me, right? Anyway, Season 3, Episode 10, True Colors begins with the Baxter family cooking up soul food in celebration of Black History Month. And Raven announces that she and her best friend Chelsea are going to be applying to a store in their local mall known as Sassy's. They go to apply and are met with multiple tasks, so the manager gets an idea of who would be a good employee. Raven does everything right, and Chelsea fucks every single challenge up. At the same time, Corey is supposed to be writing a 500-page essay on a historic Black figure, but finds it boring. So Mr. Baxter encourages him to be more enthusiastic about his race. We cut to the next day at school where Chelsea gets a phone call from the Sassy's manager and becomes ecstatic finding out she got the job. Then she asks about Raven and is told that she didn't. Raven gets a vision and the manager can be heard saying this.
The truth is, I don't hire Black people.
Chelsea decides to quit for obvious reasons. Meanwhile, Corey falls asleep at his desk, and his dad, dressed up as Frederick Douglass, comes out of his computer. At first watch, I was like, what the fuck am I watching? But then I remembered, oh yeah, Corey fell asleep. I just wish they transitioned into his dream better. Literally a vortex transition would have done the job. Anyway, Corey is taught about a lot of Black figures that should be respected due to their contribution to America's history. Now back to Raven. She explains to her parents that she didn't get the job because the manager just doesn't like Black people. They try to come up with a plan to get the manager fired, but realize they have no evidence other than Raven's vision. So she comes up with a plan to record her saying it and submit it to the news. She quickly calls Chelsea and tells her not to quit and instead wear a hat with a camera in it. While working, Raven comes in with a disguise, and this is where the vision took place. The manager is then caught being racist. Once that happens, we cut to the television where the news anchor explains the manager has been fired and the company issued a public apology.
The truth is, I don't hire Black people.
And there you have it.
Oh, and Corey also got the essay done out of passion rather than being forced by his school. I think the episode did a great job capturing how easily people can be racist and how heavily it can affect the recipient. For example, not being able to get a job. Though I never got into That So Raven because I was too young. My older sister loved the show and I remember bits and pieces here and there, and it was a pleasant surprise to see how they chose to tackle racism in this episode. Hero Elementary. So we've answered this question. What if autism wasn't something that had to be explained? It was just part of who a superhero is. This next case is more of that. It's exactly what happened with Hero Elementary, a PBS kids show that premiered in June of 2020. And honestly, the way they approached it is pretty brilliant. The show's set in a school for budding superheroes learning to master their powers. There's Lucida Sky, who can fly but is terrified of heights, Sarah Snap with super strength and teleportation, Benny Bubbles, who creates force-fueled bubbles, and then there's AJ Gadgets. He's got the power of thought projection. Basically, he can show people what he's thinking, and he invents all of these amazing gadgets. He's also autistic, but interestingly, the creators didn't set out to make an autistic character. Carol Lynn Parente and Christine Ferraro, who both worked on Sesame Street's autism initiative with the character Julia, were developing AJ's personality when they realized something. The traits they'd given him, the sensitivity to loud sounds, dislike of wet clothes, specific routines, etc., were autistic traits. So instead of creating an ambiguously coded character, they made it official. AJ is autistic. And they brought in consultants like Frank Campagna, who goes by the Autism Daddy, to review every single script, over 80 scripts actually. So AJ doesn't like loud noises or wet clothes. He's deeply attached to his backpack, which doubles as a jetpack and holds all his inventions. When things get overwhelming, he flaps his hands. Sometimes he wears noise-canceling headphones, but none of this stops him from being a hero. His teammates just know this about him. In one episode, Track That Pack, his backpack accidentally floats away in a lake, and the entire time desperately searches for it because they understand how important it is to him. For most of the series, autism isn't mentioned at all. AJ is simply a part of Sparks' crew, solving problems along his friends. The show ran for 2 seasons without explicitly addressing his autism until April 2nd of 2021, which happens to be Autism Acceptance Day. That's when they aired the double episode AJ's Extra Superpower, and in the first part, a little girl's toys keep disappearing from her backyard. The team discovers it's a neighbor's dog getting in, but they can't figure out how. AJ's attention to detail, his ability to notice tiny things others miss, becomes the key to solving it. In the second part, the crew goes to Citytown HeroCon, where AJ's dressed as his favorite superhero, Jetman Jones. But when he gets there, he's shocked to see hundreds of people dressed the same way. How will he find the real Jetman Jones? Again, his autistic traits, his deep focus, his ability to remember specific details help him spot the real one in the crowd. The episode actually has AJ explain autism himself. He says, "My friends say I have an extra superpower, my autism, but it's not really a superpower. Autism isn't the same for everyone, but for me, it means I'm extra sensitive to the way things feel or sound. Some things are harder for me because I have autism, but some things are easier because I have autism. Linda Semensky, head of content at PBS Kids, said she was drawn to how the show models kids solving their own problems. The adults here guide the kids to figure things out themselves, and AJ contributes too to that problem solving, using both his superpowers and his unique way of seeing the world. That normalization is the real superpower of the show. Knuckles' Addiction: The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, Season 2, Episode 4. This next one aired in Cartoon Network in 2009. The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack was already known for being weird and unsettling, but the episode Knuckles and His Hilarious Problem took things to a whole different level. The episode opens on Trash Day in Stormalong Harbor. Flapjack and Captain Knuckles are digging through barrels when Flapjack discovers an entire barrel of candy that Peppermint Larry accidentally threw out. Knuckles immediately starts gorging himself, giving Flapjack only 2 measly pieces while he devours the rest. The show doesn't even try to hide what's happening. Knuckles starts acting drunk. He's stumbling around, slurring his words, claiming that Lollipoop Deck's buckets are filled with tears. Then he tells Flapjack he loves him and Bubby, something he never says sober, and passes out completely. When he wakes up, the candy's gone and he's devastated. Alarmed, Flapjack takes him to Dr. Barber, who diagnoses Knuckles with the candy rot and proposes this absolute, rather horrifying experimental surgery. I'm talking about massaging the teeth, plunging the tongue, filling the stomach with lava rocks, and closing the throat up with a wasp's nest. Terrified, Flapjack suggests he'll just keep Knuckles away from candy instead. Dr. Barber agrees but warns him if it doesn't work, there's always surgery. Now you can see the addict's behavior in its full glory, trickery to be precise. Knuckles, now tied to a wheelchair, tries convincing Flapjack that the whole thing was a dream and that he's still allowed to have candy. When that doesn't work, he tricks Flapjack into untying him so he can run straight to the candy barrel. Flapjack eventually finds Knuckles at the candy trough in a completely rotten state and wheels him home. This is just one of those scenes in cartoons I will just never forget. The way they drew Knuckles just so drained and defeated. I don't know how to say it, but he looks so weak, right? And he just picks up that piece of candy and puts it in his mouth that, mind you, came out of some stranger's mouth. I've never forgotten that scene. You know, ever since I watched it when I was like probably 7, I used to love Flapjack, bro. This was my show. I think it was every Thursday night on Cartoon Network. I remember talking to my mom about Thursday nights, and I bet if I remind her, she probably remembers it too. Anyway, let's keep talking about it. Bubby decides Knuckles needs isolation time, so she ties him to a raft and sets him adrift at sea. While adrift, Knuckles has a full-blown drug-induced nightmare. He sees Peppermint Larry and Dr. Barber, telling him his only solution is candy surgery. A giant deformed Flapjack appears, saying, "It's okay, Captain. You're safe now here with us. We are Candied Island. So are you. We're all whirling in Candy Cosmos." Then he sticks his candy cane arms down Knuckles' throat and starts vomiting candy into his mouth. Unironically, for Flapjack, this is a pretty normal scene. Anyway, Knuckles returns, claiming he's completely cured. To prove it, they go to the candy barrel. When Flapjack tries eating a piece of candy, Knuckles knocks it out of his hand and reveals he still wants to find Candied Island, but now to destroy it. He convinces everyone that candy is the cause of the sorrow in their lives, getting them to dump it all in the ocean. And so it ends, right? Well, no. Turns out that Knuckles still loves candy. He tricked everyone, and they actually dumped it into a rowboat he'd stationed there. The episode ends rather sadly, with Knuckles tied back to the wheelchair, still an addict, and Flapjack cheerfully saying he's glad to have Knuckles back. So the worst part about this episode is that there is no recovery or redemption. And maybe that was the lesson if you want to get deep about it. The brutal reality is that addiction doesn't always have a happy ending. Henry from Horrid Henry. Horrid Henry is a British children's series that has been quietly making parents uncomfortable for years because the more you watch it as an adult, the more you realize that Henry really isn't the problem. So here's the setup. Henry is a regular kid who loves junk food, loud music, his gang, and absolutely nothing his parents approve of. His younger brother Peter is the complete opposite, tidy, obedient, and a vegetable enthusiast. The mom and dad treat these two boys very differently, and the show plays this contrast very well and almost makes it seem normal. What it's actually doing though is showing a textbook case of parental favoritism, and how that favoritism shapes a child's behavior over time. The episode that puts this in the sharpest focus is Horrid Henry's Horrid Revenge, Season 1, Episode 20. It starts simple. Peter is painting a picture of mom. Henry walks over, puts on an alien mask to scare him, and while Peter runs off, Henry adds a blue mustache to the painting. Peter comes back, sees it, and immediately calls for mom. Henry warns him he will paint him blue if he does. Peter grabs the brush anyway, they fight over it, the paint spills all over Peter. Mom walks in and sees the mess, but she only hears Peter's version though, and that's enough. Henry is sent to his room, and the punishment is, on top of everything else, that he isn't allowed to make any noise with his music. The next day, all his stuff is gone. He wakes up to a recorded message from mom explaining his stuff has been confiscated. Stuck in his room, Henry starts scribbling on the wall, then he stops. He looks at what he's done, and instead of leaving it, he gets other characters, Margaret and Ralph, to pass him a bucket of paint through the window, and he repaints the entire wall himself, finishing just as Mom comes up with his lunch. He acknowledged and fixed his own mess. When Mom asks if he's been thinking about why his things were taken away, he says yes. She accepts it and lets him out. The rest of the episode is Henry engineering his own revenge, tricking Peter and the others into painting their faces and the entire exterior of the house blue, convinced they're saving the planet from an alien invasion. When Dad comes home and finds the house painted, and Peter gleefully tells him, "We saved the house," Dad finally sends Peter to his room and Henry screams in triumph. Now that's just one instance, and there are for sure other many instances of such, but in general, I believe the show does a good job showing a mischievous child seeking parental attention the only way they know how, and having learned that recognition often comes through the punishment of the less favorite child doing everything possible to reach that outcome, because no matter what he does, that label stays on, and Henry stays, quote, horrid. Cubone. Pokemon Origins. Now, speaking to all the Pokemon fans out there, there's a reason Cubone is called the Lonely Pokemon. According to the Pokédex across every Pokemon game, Cubone wears the skull of its deceased mother on its head like a helmet. When it cries, the skull vibrates and makes his mournful sound. At night, especially during a full moon, Cubone looks up and sees its mother's face in the moon, which makes it howl with sadness. It's literally stuck in a perpetual state of grief. So how do you turn that into a kid's episode? Well, Pokemon Origins, which aired in 2013, didn't shy away from it. They really leaned in on episode 2 and made it center on Lavender Town, which in games, I'm sure you guys know, is the creepy part, the creepy Pokemon cemetery. And they do bring back the original song for that episode, which I thought was really cool. But yeah, it's the place where deceased Pokemon are buried and mourned. The protagonist Red visits the Pokemon House, a shelter for orphan and abandoned Pokemon run by Mr. Fuji. There he notices one Pokemon that's different from all the others, while the other Pokemon are playing happily with their caretakers, refusing to interact with anyone except Mr. Fuji. The show explains why through a flashback. Team Rocket Grunts were trying to capture Cubone to sell it. Apparently, baby Cubones fetch for a high price. When Cubone's mother, a Marowak, stepped in to protect her child, the Grunts attacked her with an electric stun rod, hard enough to kill her. Cubone heard its mother's final cry as it ran away, and then stood by the rock where she died until at least dawn, completely frozen in grief. Then Mr. Fuji found the orphan Pokemon and brought it to the shelter, but Cubone remained angry and distrustful of humans. I mean, humans just murdered its mother right in front of it. It has its justified reasons, and it's interesting because the show's creators aren't sugarcoating such. They show Cubone's behavioral response to grief, the resulting isolation, distrust, and the inability to connect with others. I mean, it's actual trauma representation. And what makes this educational is that it validates the grieving process for kids. Cubone takes its time to grieve, and the Pokédex actually states that Cubone only evolves into Marowak once it comes to terms with the pain of its mother's death. That's actually a pretty sophisticated concept, that grief is something you have to work through, not something that just disappears. Pokemon creator Satoshi Tajiri actually designed Cubone specifically from thinking about how sad it would be for a Pokemon to die. It's darker than most kids' cartoons would go, but that's the point. And don't even get me started on the concept of Cubone hugging his mother's ghost for the last time until she floats up to heaven. If you don't shed a tear while watching that episode, bruh, you not human. I'm not gonna lie, because that one got me. I'm not gonna lie, that one got me. But let's head on to the next one.
Sesame Street, Season 25, Episode 5, Racism on Sesame Street. I don't really think Sesame Street needs an introduction, so I'm not gonna do one, but we're gonna be talking about Season 25, Episode 5, Racism on Sesame Street, which aired on November 26th, 1993. The whole episode is actually available on YouTube, but it's split into two parts. The episode starts off with Gina and Savian walking around Sesame Street and having some innocent fun. Then they walk into a shop, which I'm gonna assume Gina has some ownership of, and they're startled to be receiving an anonymous phone call telling them that people of different skin colors can't be friends. They assume it's a random bystander that saw them outside, so they explain to Telly, the Muppet, that there are some stupid people in this world, and Telly is confused as to why this is a conversation to have in the first place. Then Telly asks what they would do if that person calls again, and they mock the idea of it happening by making a fart sound.
Yes! Yes!
Remember guys, this is a toddler show. Then the story moves on to a different plot revolving around Telly and his friend Baby Bear. Telly is telling Baby Bear about what happened, and again, they're both confused. And in kids show fashion, they sing a song about being best friends. It's pretty cute. The reason they're hanging out together is because they set up an information shop where they sell information about anything for 1 penny. Gina comes by and nothing really notable happens besides a monologue about a stereotype that girls should be more scared of things than boys. The episode ends with Gina and Savion looking at the Sesame Street apartments, wondering if the anonymous guy is watching them. So they decide to loudly sing the best friend song, hoping that the racist will see. You know, since this show is for smaller kids, I'd say they did a good job here. If it was for teens, it would have been a fail, but they made it so that
that the anonymous racist has no argument, which means we only get to see Telly's side of confusion and Gina and Savion's reasoning that it's just the product of bad people. During the year of 2020, Sesame Street continued to push the anti-racism agenda due to the problems going on at the time. The videos I watched were honestly pretty innocent and educational, which confused me on the amount of dislikes they got, though comments were disabled so I couldn't check out any opinions. I decided to go to the source of the video, which was CNN's Twitter, which has 11 million views, and I was able to gather a glimpse of the negative comments. This is why I'm gonna assume the videos talking about racism have dislikes, but I also found these wholesome images too.
Arthur, Asperger's, and more. There's this kid named George who meets someone new at school, and right away, something feels different. The new kid, Carl, knows all these random facts about lions, how they used to live everywhere but now they're only in Africa and India, and he's weirdly specific about things like hating the color brown. George thinks Carl's interesting, especially when he sees this incredibly detailed train drawing Carl made completely from memory. But when George shows Carl his ventriloquist dummy, Wally, Carl has what looks like a panic attack. That's when Carl's mom explains he has Asperger's syndrome. This is the When Carl Met George episode of Arthur. It's interesting to say the least that the kid in question, Carl, can do incredible stuff, like identify trains with great accuracy, mentioning details like the train being a steam locomotive built by the Great Western Railway in the United Kingdom. He prefers his apple juice, quote, in a box, not in a bottle, a small detail that shows how people with Asperger's often have particular preferences. And when he starts talking about trains, according to George, it can be hard for him to stop. So George goes to his friend Brain for help understanding what's going on. Turns out, Brain's uncle has Asperger's too. He's a physicist who won the Crown City Physics Prize, but according to Brain, his uncle has trouble being around people because his brain works differently. Brain then explains it through an alien planet analogy. Imagine you've crash landed somewhere that looks like Earth but isn't quite right. People talk really loudly like they're using bullhorns. You speak the same language but have trouble understanding what they mean. Things that seem funny to you don't make sense to others. And the analogy works because it doesn't make Asperger's sound like a deficit. Instead, it frames it as experiencing the world through a different processing system. George eventually returns to give Carl the puzzle piece that accidentally fell into his pocket, along with a book about trains. The two become friends and George narrates the lessons he learned. Speak quietly around Carl, be clear, and don't take it personally if Carl ignores him. And just like the Bluey one, what this episode avoids, again in my opinion, is probably more important than what it includes. For instance, there's no magical moment where Carl just starts acting more neurotypical. Carl remains Carl, someone who needs specific accommodations and has specific quirks, but who's also capable of friendship. Now moving to The Wheel Deal from season 14, episode 1. Brain slips on a banana peel. He slips while practicing for a charity basketball tournament. Buster had tossed it toward the trash, missed, and Brain stepped on it. He ends up in a wheelchair for a week with a sprained ankle and leg injury. Brain's convinced he can't compete in the fundraiser anymore. At the hospital during physical therapy, Brain meets Lydia Fox, a girl who's permanently in a wheelchair. According to the show's backstory, Lydia was born unable to walk. She plays on a wheelchair basketball team called the Wheel Warriors, which has an undefeated 11-0 record that season, and challenges Brain to shoot hoops with her. Brain initially refuses, struggling with basic wheelchair navigation, but Lydia offers to help him. We actually see Brain's temporary disability as genuinely difficult for him. He can't maneuver through doorways easily, he's frustrated, and he's worried about the tournament, but Lydia doesn't coddle him. She's matter of fact about the whole thing, beating him easily at a game of horse, and then offering to coach him so he can compete in the fundraiser. During their training sessions, Lydia proves she's as intellectually sharp as Brain is. She mentions the Pythagorean theorem and quotes writers like Virgil and Marcel Proust. She even jokes about playing horse using the full Latin name, which I will attempt to read. Here it is on the screen anyway, but it's Equus Ferris Caballos. To give Brain more chances, the episode treats Lydia's disability as a characteristic rather than a limitation. She's athletic, competitive, intellectually sharp, and confident. The show doesn't position her as inspiring simply for existing in a wheelchair. She's skilled at basketball and helps Brain learn new techniques. Her wheelchair use is never framed as tragic or something to be pitied. Interestingly, Lydia was created by an 11-year-old named Connor Gordon from Savage, Minnesota, who won a 2009 contest called the Arthur CVS All Kids Can Character Search. Both episodes from Arthur demonstrate a straightforward approach. Show the disability, explain how it affects the character's daily life, and then let the character be a person with interests, skills, and relationships. Like I said for Bluey, it's also true here that the episodes do not put a super inspirational narrative on the disability or do a tragedy framing or offer a magical solution like a kid walking again from sheer willpower. No, it's all very matter-of-fact real life. Now, so far in this video, we've talked about good examples of disabilities shown in children's cartoons, but let's talk about something that caused a little bit of controversy. Now, this isn't a cartoon, it's a live action show. It is The Lure of the Orb, Smurfs.
Season 6, Episode 34. This next one, unlike the three we've already talked about, is an allegory, meaning at surface level, it's just another story, it could go over kids' heads, but when you go deeper, it's actually a lesson about drugs. So I guess it's not made to go over kids' heads, but it's made to blend in the plot, you know what I mean? So no, they're not going to be talking about crack cocaine in the Smurfs. They did have the crossover episode where crack cocaine was mentioned, but we're not talking about that, we're talking about the Smurfs, Jesus. True to its hidden meaning nature, it all starts innocently enough. The Smurfs are preparing for the Spring Day pageant, and everyone's stressed trying to get everything done in time. Poet is especially struggling, trying to compose what he hopes will be his best work ever. But between Taylor taking measurements, Harmony practicing his horn outside the window, and Jokey setting off explosions nearby, he can't focus. So he heads into the forest looking for peace and quiet. That's when he meets Allura. She appears as a beautiful enchantress and offers Poet a magic orb that can, quote, lift spirits and inspire the uninspired with magic power just by holding it. Poet tries it and suddenly the words are flowing. Oddly, but flowing. Allura tells him to take the orb back to the village in case he needs it again. After Poet leaves, she transforms back into her true form as an evil witch. That night, the other Smurfs find Poet writing pages and pages of poetry looking exhausted. He tells them that he doesn't need a break because he has all the energy he needs from the magic orb. Smurfette and Hefty warn him to be careful using magic to change the way he feels, but Poet points out he's done more work in a day than he's ever done in a month. A few other Smurfs are immediately attracted to the idea and ask to touch the orb. The next day, all hell breaks loose. Farmer is working his fields like crazy. Painter's creating this bizarre portrait, and Harmony's doing this weird chaotic music. All 5 Smurfs look completely worn out but can't seem to stop. Papa Smurf rushes into Poet's house and confiscates the orb, but that night, Handy creeps into his bedroom and swaps the magic orb for an empty identical case. In short, they're basically lying and stealing to feed their addiction instead of, recovering from it. And maybe as expected, the work they produce gets worse and worse. Soon, Hefty discovers they've been using the orb behind Papa Smurf's back. He grabs it and tosses it into the fire to destroy it. Then the 5 Smurfs sneak out to the forest to find Allura, desperate for another orb. She leads them through a snowy mountain path to her residence, where there's a bigger orb. They rush to touch it, feel that surge of energy, but it wears off almost immediately. They head back inside, only to discover Allura's true form as an evil witch. Magic chains appear on them, trapping them there. The only way they escape is when Poet realizes what's happening and uses a mop to knock the orb off its stand and break it. Back in the village, Poet reads his orb-influenced poetry and is horrified by how odd it sounds. But then Allura shows up one more time, offering Poet a new orb. This time, having learned his lesson, Poet rejects it, and he's stuck by his newfound confidence in his own abilities again. Pretty sure you can see the allegory here. The orb is a drug, and how they relate to it is an addiction. It's a decent watch, and it could spark a conversation, but personally, I do prefer when the kids' cartoons do just straight up talk about marijuana, talk about the bad drug, talk about crack cocaine, for example, rather than the allegories. I feel like if you're gonna make a statement about drugs being addictive and bad, then make the statement. That's just my opinion though. Let me know what y'all think down in the comments. Let's head on to the next one. Martin Mertens from Adventure Time. Adventure Time ran on Cartoon Network from 2010 to 2018, and for most of that run, Finn the Human believed he had been abandoned as a baby and left alone in the woods. He was found and raised by 2 anthropomorphic dogs named Joshua and Margaret, but the question of his biological father sat unresolved in the background for years, until Season 6 forced it open. The episode is Escape from the Citadel, the Season 6 premiere. Finn has learned that his father, Martin Mertens, is imprisoned in the Crystal Citadel, a multiversal jail reserved for those who commit cosmic crimes. Finn assumes, reasonably, that his dad is probably a guard. But no, his dad isn't a guard. Martin is in fact a prisoner. The moment Finn actually sees him, Martin doesn't recognize his son. He even calls him Flynn. Now, once Finn helps set him free, Martin immediately looks for an exit. His leg destroyed from a rather evil angle, he manipulates Finn into healing him using the Citadel Guardian's regenerative blood, playing up fatherly warmth just long enough to get what he needs. "You and me, daddy and baby," he tells Finn while positioning his broken leg for repair. The second it's done, he's gone. Finn spends the rest of the episode trying to stop his father from escaping with a crew of cosmic criminals. He grabs onto the crystal shard Martin is riding out on, holding with everything he has, his grass sword arm expanding and mutating under the strain. One of the criminals cuts the tether. Finn's grass sword tears away from his body, and with it, his entire right arm. Martin sails off into space. Finn falls into the crystal ocean, one-armed in silence. The devastating part is what the show reveals 3 seasons later. In Min and Marty from the Islands miniseries, it turns out Martin didn't start out this way. He was a con artist living on Hub Island, a hidden community of the last surviving humans, and a genuinely shady one, selling out other people to the authorities in exchange for gadgets. But when he met Minerva Campbell, a doctor who who covered for him to prevent his re-education, something shifted. He fell in love. He got a job at a barbershop, became a stay-at-home dad to little Finn while Minerva worked. Then one night, an old enemy came looking for revenge. Martin grabbed Finn and ran for a raft, planning only to circle around the island until things cooled down. He was about to text Minerva to explain when the storm hit, and the Island Guardian, a massive colossus designed to prevent people from leaving, surfaced from the ocean and attacked. Martin turned to baby Finn and told him, "Don't worry, Daddy's got a plan." Then he climbed the Guardian and blinded it with the laser gadget, buying Finn time. The explosion sent both Martin and Finn's raft in opposite directions. Finn drifted toward the mainland. Martin was rescued by sailors with a serious head injury, and somewhere in that aftermath, the man who said, "I'll be back for you," never came back. But when Martin did eventually return to Finn's life, whatever had made him a father was gone, replaced by someone who couldn't even remember his own son's name, and who ultimately cost that son his arm. I mean, he could care less for Martin. Now, of all the episodes we've covered, I feel like this one is a bit more cryptic in terms of displaying parental failure, though that doesn't make it any less portraying though. Finding Nemo, the Barracuda attack. Alright, so we're jumping into a mainstream one, maybe the most mainstream IP on this list. So most Disney and Pixar movies ease you into the sad parts. They build up to them, give you time to prepare, except for apparently Finding Nemo and Up. The movie opens with Marlin and Coral, two clownfish parents, admiring their new home in an anemone on the Great Barrier Reef. They're about to become parents to over 400 eggs. Everything's perfect, they're joking around, talking about baby names, imagining their future. It's warm and funny and completely disarming. Then everything changes in about 30 seconds. A barracuda appears. Marlin tells Coral to get inside the anemone, but she sees the eggs exposed and rushes to protect them. Marlin tries to stop her, tries to fight off the predator, but he's knocked unconscious. When he wakes up, Coral is gone and the eggs are gone too. Everything except one cracked egg that survived, which becomes Nemo. It is arguably, from the perspective of kids I believe, one of the rawest, most brutal openings in a Disney movie because it simply doesn't give the viewer a chance to prepare. You don't even get enough time to grow attached to the characters first. One moment there is a complete family, the next moment there isn't. Just try to think about that as a kid. Although, to be fair, that's closer to how trauma actually works in real life, and it's only that most kids' movies wouldn't dare to show it. Originally, this scene was going to be told through flashbacks later in the film. Pixar animator Jason Deemer shared that after the final test screening with that version, nobody said a word, and they thought they made quote-unquote their first bad movie. Co-director Lee Unkrich stepped in and moved the entire sequence to the beginning. That decision also helped the audience understand Marlin's behavior from the start, and it made a lot of sense really. Without seeing this trauma, Marlin just looks like an annoying, overprotective parent. Kids watching might think he's unreasonable for not letting Nemo explore, but because we witnessed what Marlin witnessed, we understand. The entire movie becomes about how unprocessed trauma affects parenting with textbook symptoms of PTSD. And I know that the film is about Nemo because, well, he's in the title, but zooming in, it also becomes this kind of therapy for Marlin. He's forced to face his fears, the open ocean, sharks, jellyfish, the unknown. Along the way, characters like Dory and the sea turtles help him realize he can't control everything, that trying to prevent all danger is impossible. Ultimately, it shows, and this is me interpreting it a bit, that people or sea creatures can adapt, can find new relationships, can move forward while still carrying that loss. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Season 1, Episode 6, Mistaken Identity. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air aired from 1990 to 1996 on NBC and followed a street-smart teen played by Will Smith, whose name is Will Smith. I didn't grow up with this show, but I didn't know Will Smith played Will Smith in this show. Anyway, the show follows Will Smith and the troubles he gets into in the neighborhood of Bel-Air, Los Angeles. In Season 1, Episode 6, Mistaken Identity, the episode begins with Uncle Phil and his wife Vivian going to a retreat in Palm Springs. They break the news to the kids that they're staying at home. So Will comes up with a plan to ask Uncle Phil's boss if he needs him to drive his car over there since they'll be flying in a helicopter. So Will and Carlton attempt to drive the Mercedes to Palm Springs but are suddenly stopped by a cop. Carlton is hopeful as he says the policeman is their friend and should be able to give them some direction since they're lost. Will instructs Carlton to keep his hands on the wheel, but he doesn't listen and instead goes for a handshake. The police officer then tells him to keep his hands on the wheel. Carlton is extremely innocent and Will is telling him what not to do and he just ignores him. He takes out his license and registration and says that the car isn't his, by the way, which prompts the officer to tell him to get out the car, and then we cut to the police station where Will is giving Carlton a pep talk on how cops treat black people and how to talk back to them by keeping their answers short and sweet. This doesn't seem to get through Carlton's head though, as he's saying more than he should to the cops, which just makes their story seem fake, furthering the cops' suspicions that these two black males stole the car. They get a chance to make a phone call, so they call the boss's wife, and she mistakes "I'm in jail" for "I'm in Yale." She then later hangs up and tells Carlton's parents that he got into Yale, leaving them confused. Then the duo end up getting thrown in a cell and Will comes up with a plan to only confess to the crimes they didn't commit if a camera crew shows up and broadcasts it. Uncle Phil and his wife end up seeing this as it interrupts the football game everyone was watching at the retreat, and they go to the station demanding the kids are set free. The cops disrespect them though, not seeing them as real people. And then Henry Firth shows up. The the boss and owner of the car, and the cops treat him with the utmost respect. Henry says he knows those kids, and Uncle Phil tells the cops to let them free before he sues them, as he's a lawyer. Once at home, Will and Carlton have a serious discussion about racism against black people, as Carlton is oblivious to it, even after the event. He says that the cops were, quote, just trying to do their jobs, which angers Will, and he tells him that no matter what, as long as they're black, their lives will be harder than the average white man. The episode ends in a very morbid way, with no happy ending, as Carlton is trying to make sense of why they were stopped. He claims they were just driving too slow, and that's why the cops stopped them.
If you were a policeman, and you saw a car driving 2 miles an hour, wouldn't you stop it?
I asked myself that question the first time I was stopped. Good night, son.
Then the camera pans out, and we see Carlton reflecting on being racially profiled. We fade to black, and the credits roll. There's no music like usual. It's just quiet. Honestly, it's an extremely real look at what it could be like finding out that you're in the minority. Not only that, but realizing the fact that your life is going to be a lot harder than it should be. I really like this episode. I always like, and I'm sure many of you do too, when shows get serious, especially when there's not a happy ending. It's only real life. If you guys are interested, make sure to go look it up and watch it. It's a really good watch.
Girl Meets World, and how they portrayed autism. So back in September of 2015, Girl Meets World aired an episode that was supposed to spread awareness about autism. Instead, it became one among the most controversial storylines in Disney Channel history. The episode centers around Farkle Minkus, this lovable genius character who's part of the main friend group. So here's what happens. After taking an IQ test that confirms that he's a genius, the school guidance counselor pulls him aside. She tells him they need to run more tests because his behaviors might indicate he has Asperger's syndrome. Now, when Farkle tells his friends Riley and Maya about the possibility, their reaction is, let's just say intense. I don't know how much I can show you guys of all of these episodes due to copyright, but I'll explain it my best. Maya literally jumps off the couch and says, "You don't," while Riley echoes, "Let's go tell them you don't." The whole room goes silent and somber, like you just told them he had a terminal illness. Even Lucas, another friend, tries to comfort Farkle by saying he behaves like a, quote, perfectly normal Farkle. But later in the episode, the friends study up on Asperger's traits, and every time Farkle identifies with a symptom, Maya grabs him and says, "Stop doing that. He's gonna stop doing that." They were treating autism like it was like some deadly disease, or something that just needs to be fixed immediately. Consequently, the overarching message being sent became, autism is something to be feared, denied, and stopped. But that can't be what Disney intended, right? Well, kinda. According to the writers, they wanted to show how friends could support someone through a diagnosis. The episode includes educational moments where Farkle explains what autism is, and by the end, everyone comes together with this message about acceptance and embracing uniqueness. The thing is, the execution completely missed the mark. By the end of the episode, Farkle doesn't have autism. The counselor tells him he's just uniquely Farkle, and they can't categorize him. But then we find out that another character, Isadora Smackle, Farkle's academic rival and later girlfriend, was actually diagnosed with Asperger's at age 5. She's portrayed with the typical autism stereotypes, you know, genius level intelligence, difficulty with hugs, struggles reading social cues, and unfortunately throughout the episode, she's mostly shown as the butt of jokes, with her awkward attempts of flirting punctuated by laugh tracks. Basically, everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. The episode wanted to teach acceptance, but it didn't deliver that. Fortunately, the other shows on this list did. Not sure if that makes any of it better though. In the Garden of Delights, Thundercats Season 1, Episode 9. This next show brings us to Thundercats from 1985, and it is an allegory as well. This episode is called The Garden of Delights. So it starts with earthquakes shaking up the area around a place called Cat's Lair. Tiger goes out to investigate, the ground opens beneath him, and he falls into a crack. A giant worm attacks him and drags him underground. Now Tiger starts following this trail of glowing slime the worm left behind, nothing odd. Deep in these tunnels, the imagery changes a bit because Tiger encounters Silky, this plant creature with a human face. She welcomes him to what she calls the Garden of Delights and offers him a yellow fruit. Tiger tries to resist. He knows something's off. But eventually he gives in and takes a bite. After that, he starts hallucinating, enters this euphoric state where he's imagining himself flying. The show portrays this with bright colors, freedom, weightlessness, and well, that's the trap. Because now Tiger is completely hooked, totally under the fruit's spell. Then Silky reveals her true form. She's actually Mumra, or Mumra, I forgot how they pronounce it in the show. The series' main villain. And then we get to the explicit addiction metaphor. Mumra gives Tiger another fruit, but there's a price. He has to steal the Sword of Omens. And rather unsurprisingly, just like that, Tiger's compromised. The the fruit, has turned him into someone who will betray his own team. Back at Cat's Lair, when Tiger returns, he's visibly dazed. His teammates notice something's wrong, but don't quite understand what. That night, Tiger can't sleep.
Silky's voice is in his head, demanding he'll fulfill his end of the bargain, so he sneaks out and steals a Sword of Omens, delivering it straight to Mumra's pyramid. The episode reaches this turning point when Mumra hands Tigra yet another fruit in exchange for information about how to defeat Lion O. But this time, Tigra only pretends to eat it. That moment, where he fakes taking the drug, represents him breaking free from the addiction's control. It's his first act of resistance, the moment his willpower starts winning over the substance. Once Tigra's back to his senses, he helps the other Thundercats defeat Mumra and the mutants. The episode wraps up with the villains defeated and Tigra freed from the fruit's influence. So far, we've talked about this allegory and the Smurfs allegory. Let me know which one you guys like more. I don't really know if I could pick a favorite. To be fair, in the other one, more people got addicted, and in this one, it was just one person. I really don't know which I like more, but there's still more to talk about. Let's get on to the next one. Parents from Gravity Falls. One of the things this one does quietly and consistently throughout its run is raise the question, what kind of parent sends their 12-year-old twins to spend the summer with a relative they barely know in a remote Oregon town without checking in enough to notice if anything is wrong? Dipper and Mabel's parents almost don't exist in the show. They appear in the first episode only as a pair of arms, trading the twins' belongings for luggage and sunscreen. Dipper's opening voiceover is, "Our parents decided we could use some fresh air." Interestingly, the original pitch for the series was more candid. The parents had won tickets for a summer-long luxury cruise, and Stan was the only relative available. They reportedly hoped, as an afterthought, that he, quote, isn't under house arrest anymore. That detail aged into something more interesting once the show revealed who Stan actually was. This man, Stanley Pines, whom they sent their children to spend the summer with, was a con man who had been using his twins' identity for decades. By the time Dipper and Mabel had arrived, Stan had been imprisoned in 3 different counties, banned from 32 of the 50 states, and was operating an illegal tourist trap out of a house that he didn't own. His listed criminals include snacks evasion, impersonating a dentist, bingo fraud, and pug trafficking, among others. I don't know, but whatever the parents thought they were sending their kids to, if they did think about it at all, he definitely wasn't it. Now, I have to make it clear that Gravity Falls isn't a show about its absent parents, but about what Dipper and Mabel find when they're left to navigate things without them. But the absence of the parents is a really large point, too large to ignore. I mean, they check in once via a phone call where Stan lies through effortlessly, and they don't push back hard enough to have the twins sent home even when things are clearly wrong. They're satisfied with whatever Stan tells them. Dipper and Mabel, meanwhile, spend the summer surviving demon possession, interdimensional threats, and a literal apocalypse, and they write cheerful letters home the whole time. This could be seen as kids suffering but being too young to even know that they're suffering, but maybe that's a little bit too woke, or maybe I'm just reading into it too much. But from what I remember when I was watching Gravity Falls back when it was coming out on Disney Channel, them not having their parents around isn't the main idea you're supposed to get, you know, just a fun show, but it just is interesting that their kids are fighting interdimensional demons and their parents are nowhere to be found. Star Trek, the animated series Yesteryear. Now let's go back decades ago to 1973. Saturday morning cartoons were pretty much about superheroes punching villains and talking animals getting into shenanigans. Star Trek, the animated series, decided to tackle death, but not human death, your pet's death. Specifically, euthanasia. Yes, we're talking about the kids' cartoon, not the movies. This is specifically was made with kids in mind. Just imagine waking up on a Saturday morning, you got your cereal, you're ready to watch some cartoons, and you just get explained that your pet will die at some point. You might have to put it down peacefully. And honestly, did they do it well? That's what we're going to talk about. Not the fact that they did it. That's cool that they did it, whatever. Did they actually do it well? I watched all the episodes on this list, and honestly, I liked it. The episode is named Yesteryear. The episode puts 7-year-old Spock in a position where he had to decide whether to let his beloved pet die peacefully or prolong its suffering. Let me give you a little context about the setup. Adult Spock travels back in time and finds his younger self about to undertake the Casan, a Vulcan coming-of-age ritual in the desert. Young Spock is being bullied by other Vulcan children for being half human, and he's struggling with whether to embrace his human side or his Vulcan heritage. His pet, a massive creature that looks like a 600-pound teddy bear with fangs, named Ichea, is his only real companion. When young Spock runs away into the desert, Ichea follows to protect him. They're attacked by a Lamaya, a predatory animal, and Ichea fights it off but gets poisoned in the process. The healer arrives and presents young Spock with 2 options. He can prolong Ichea's life with medication, but the animal will be in constant pain from the poison, or he can euthanize Ichea and let him die peacefully. Young Spock chooses to let Ichea die. And make no mistake, NBC was not happy about this. The network expressed serious concern about showing a pet being euthanized on a children's program, but the creator had full creative control of the series and approved it, so the network couldn't do much about it. The episode aired as written. This was actually the first time a children's show depicted the death of a child's pet, and it basically taught children that pets do die, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let them go instead of making them suffer longer. That's a pretty heavy message for a Saturday morning cartoon about a guy with pointy ears traveling through time. The only part I guess I disagree with is the airing time. Maybe it shouldn't have been Saturday right in the morning. Alright, maybe 12 p.m. Like I said, I actually did like this episode. It's very straightforward. You can tell that the Vulcans really are emotionless. They even touch on that in the episode, saying that that Vulcans don't make jokes, and then it ends off with a joke, which is pretty funny. I really appreciated how straightforward this one was.
Arthur. Season 21, Episode 4, Arthur Takes a Stand. Arthur aired on PBS from 1994 to 2022. Yeah, it barely ended last year. That's fucking crazy. Though the show did go on several hiatuses, so it wasn't active for a couple of those years. The show takes place in the fictional city of Elwood and focuses on 3rd grade student Arthur the Aardvark and his other anthropomorphic friends. In Season 21, Episode 4, which came out in 2017, the principal announces that breakfast will now be served in the cafeteria along with the lunch. The kids are excited, but after Arthur comes back due to forgetting his notebook, he realizes that the lunch lady, Mrs. McGrady, has no one to help her and is being overworked. He's shocked and says that the school needs to hire more helpers, but she says she's already attempted but heard no response back. So Arthur goes to the principal and tells her Mrs. McGrady deserves some more help, which she just ignores. She's too distracted by breakfast doing so good. And I don't know if the principal having white skin and Mrs. McGrady having brown skin had a role to play in this, so I don't want to make an assumption about that, but it's definitely something I was wondering while watching. Arthur talks to Sue on his way home about the situation, and she suggests the idea of boycotting until something is done. Here she mentions figures like Martin Luther King and John Lewis. So then in the library, a cartoon version of John Lewis appears and gives Arthur a talk about standing his ground. Between you and me, I feel like they could have given John Lewis a less human face? Anyway, Arthur, his friends, and Mrs. McGrady all choose to not leave the lunch tables until something is done. The principal comes in and tries to shut everything down in an annoyed fashion, but the group doesn't budge. It's only until John Lewis spawns in that the principal guarantees she'll contact the school board as soon as possible. The episode then ends, and this one was different from the others I've talked about. This one focused more so on the response to being mistreated, of course in a non-violent way. Boycotting has worked in the past as a peaceful protest method, so I don't see why anyone would get mad that your kids are being taught to stand up for what they believe in a peaceful way. This is another good episode, which tackled a very hard subject of responding to prejudice in a non-violent way. I still think this portrayal of John Lewis could have been a lot better. Jesus.
Sesame Street. Autism. So there's this moment on Sesame Street where Big Bird walks outside and finds his friends painting in the yard. Elmo's there, Abby Cadabby's there, and there's someone new, a red-haired, green-eyed Muppet named Julia. Big Bird introduces himself, but Julie doesn't respond. She's completely focused on her artwork. Big Bird tries again. Nothing. He looks confused, maybe a little hurt, and turns to Alan, the adult who owns Hooper's store. Alan explains that Julia has autism. This is Meet Julia, episode 4715 from season 47 of Sesame Street. I also didn't know there were over 4,700 episodes of Sesame Street, but I should have guessed. The episode aired simultaneously on both PBS and HBO because Sesame Workshop wanted maximum reach for this particular episode, which probably speaks to how much they wanted this message out there. Julie became the first Muppet character on the show to have autism, and she was developed through really hard work, extensive research, and consultation with families and autism specialists. Now, autism spectrum disorder, according to the CDC, is caused by differences in the brain, and about 1 in 36 children in the US has been diagnosed with autism. The keyword here is spectrum, as autism affects people differently. It's not a one-fits-all diagnosis. Some people with autism have difficulty with social communication, understanding body language, or regulating their tone of voice. Others might have restricted or repetitive behaviors like lining up objects or repeating words and phrases. Anyway, back to Julia. When Big Bird suggests playing tag, Julia responds by flapping her hands and bouncing, a behavior called stimming, which many autistic people do to regulate their emotions or express excitement. Abby points out that Julia is like a rubber ball, and they all start bouncing while playing tag. It's a new way to play for Big Bird, but they all enjoy it. Then a siren goes off nearby. Julia immediately panics, covering her ears. Big Bird accidentally makes things worse by tagging her too enthusiastically, and Alan has to take her away to calm her down using belly breathing techniques. And the reason I started by explaining that autism is a broad spectrum with different experiences is because this illustrates it really well. When they try to explain what it is, Alan says, well, for Julia, it means that phrase, for Julia, acknowledges that autism presents itself differently within different people. She's known as creative, friendly, and capable of forming friendships. She does things, quote, in a Julia sort of way, as Abby puts it. At the end of the episode, Big Bird introduces her to his stuffed animal, Radar. Julia has her own toy bunny that she loves very much, showing that autistic children can form strong attachments to comfort objects as well. Big Bird's glad to be Julia's friend, and the episode closes with all the Muppets singing about being friends despite their differences. The show presents autism as one characteristic among many, not her entire identity, and throughout Julia's appearances in later episodes, she remains a regular member of the Sesame Street neighborhood, not defined by her autism, but not hiding it either. The Price, BraveStarr, Season 1, Episode 47. You might not be very familiar with the show, I mean, it's pretty old, but there's a 1987 episode of BraveStarr that ends with the main character standing at a teenager's gravestone. A very dark and disturbing scene. It's called The Price, and in my opinion, from searching around, it's one of the most brutally honest depictions of drug addiction ever put into a children's cartoon. It starts with 3 kids, Jay, Brad, and Daisy, who've built themselves a clubhouse on the outskirts of Fort Kirium. They've designed it with a quote fort mode, just like the real Fort Kirium, complete with defensive capabilities. And they're about to get a visitor, a dealer who's a dingo who's dressed in a 3-piece suit with an Australian accent. He shows up at their clubhouse offering them something. Meanwhile, BraveStarr and his partner 3030 are dealing with a crisis. Minors all over New Texas are having complete mental breakdowns because of a drug called Spin. Jail cells are filling up with addicts, mostly minors from Stone Canyon who've completely lost their minds. Back to the kids, the dingo offers them this glowing, effervescent liquid. It looks magical, almost enticing, which is exactly the point. Brad and Daisy immediately refuse and walk away, but Jay decides to prove he's not, quote, chicken and takes it. Just like that, the drugs take effect. Jay starts hallucinating, he's euphoric, convinced he's found something incredible and that's under control. When Jay wants more, the dealer tells him it'll cost 3 Kirium nuggets, which is the local currency in the show. Jay goes home and steals money from his mother's purse. Then Brad finds him, and he looks really bad. And throughout all of this, he's making Brad promise not to tell anyone, calling him a quote fink over and over, accusing him of being a tattletale. What's a little bit different here from the other cartoons is that we actually get to see Brad's moral struggle. He knows his friend's in trouble, but Jay keeps calling him a chicken, keeps pressuring him to keep the secret. When Brad tries to leave the clubhouse one day, disgusted by what he's seeing, Jay even asks to borrow more money. This is where Shaman appears, this Native American mentor figure who tells Brad that breaking one promise is a small price to pay to save a friend's life. Brad takes this to heart and runs off to find BraveStarr. But time is running out and BraveStarr is out destroying the Spin Factory. Meanwhile, Jay had borrowed some more money for a 3rd dose. By the time Brad finally gets through to BraveStarr, it's too late. They rush to the clubhouse together, and what they find is Jay's lifeless body. BraveStarr checks for a pulse, finds none, and removes his hat. He tells 3030 not to bother calling Doc Clayton. The teen is dead from an overdose. Brad faints on the clubhouse ladder and 3030 catches him. Later, when the dealer's being thrown in jail, he sarcastically asks Brad if he's happy about turning him in. Brad can barely get the words out because the only thing he regrets is not speaking up sooner. BraveStarr then ends the episode at the gravestone with a speech directly to the camera. Drugs. Every year they claim thousands of lives. Each year, more young people like yourselves become involved in drugs. And each year, many of those young people end up like this. A pretty brutal reality. Lady Tremaine from Cinderella. It's not uncommon when you think about bad parenting in cartoons to picture a villain who's loud, chaotic. I mean, it seems obvious. This is someone you can clock from a mile away. But then there's Lady Tremaine, and she's a completely different character. Disney's Cinderella, released in 1950, opens with a quiet narration that lays everything out almost immediately. Cinderella's father, a widower, marries a woman named Lady Tremaine, a fellow widow with 2 daughters of her own, Anastasia and Gisela. And he actually does this because of a heartbreaking reason. All because he wants his daughter to have a motherly figure. But then he dies, and just like that, everything changes. The moment he's gone, Tremaine stops pretending. She burns through the family's inheritance, spoiling Anastasia and Gisela, while forcing Cinderella, in her own home mind you, into the role of a full-time servant. And she does it with a kind of terrifying composure. She puts on a cold, measured stare, and a voice that never raises above calm, more of a calculated tone, even when she's being openly cruel. And I truly think that's what makes her so unsettling to watch, especially as a kid, because she doesn't look like the typical way a monster would look. At least in cartoons. If you want to be deep about it, yes, this is usually how monsters look. They are humans. A human/mother that prioritizes her own well-being while neglecting her stepdaughter to the point of even using her own daughters against the poor girl. There's this specific moment about 40 minutes into the film where Cinderella shows up to join them at the ball wearing a dress her little animals had refashioned. The dress is sweet actually. They'd use a sash and some beads that her stepsisters discarded, but Tremaine notices this right away, and instead of saying anything herself, she just points it out casually to Anastasia and Gisela, and within seconds they're tearing the dress apart while Tremaine watches. The cruel part is that she never touched Cinderella. She never had to because the way she treats her is enough to cause harm. If you only watch this part, you'd probably say she's a mother who would do absolutely anything anything for her biological daughters. The problem, however, is that she's actually a master of manipulation, and not even her daughters are spared from this subtle and passive-aggressive cruelty. She, for example, pushes them into music lessons they're clearly miserable in, coaches them on self-control like they're chess pieces, and molds every aspect of their behavior around one goal: getting one of them married into nobility, because what she needs is social access. When Anastasia and Drizella fail at something, she's barely even present for them as a mother. They exist as tools for her ambition, and that's about as far as her parenting goes. We all know how this story ends, right? Later in the film, when the Grand Duke arrives with a glass slipper to find the mystery woman from the ball, Tremaine locks Cinderella in her room, and when that doesn't work and Cinderella appears at the top of the stairs, Tremaine physically trips the herald carrying the slipper, sending it shattering on the floor. Even though we get a happy ending eventually, the entire journey has been about overcoming every cold, calculated move by a stepmother who simply uses everyone to suit her own needs. She is, in a lot of ways, the most realistic villain Disney ever put on screen. Regular show, Pops' self-sacrifice. Another common notion or belief is that you're not supposed to kill off main characters. Obviously, the Duffer Brothers love that one. Crazy. I was expecting Steve to die in the Stranger Things finale, but this video isn't about that. You know, I actually watched the finale in theaters. I went out of my way to go, like, whatever. And that goes for kids' cartoons as well. They'll do fake outs, close calls, or just write characters out of the show, but they never really kill them off. Not Regular Show though. I mean, they decided to end the 8-season run by actually killing its sweetest, most innocent character and showing him watching his friends from heaven. The series finale, A Regular Epic Final Battle, aired in 2017, and that's a 3-part journey where Pops, this naive lollipop-shaped man, who's basically the embodiment of childlike joy, has to fight his evil twin brother, Anti-Pops, to save the universe. Thing is, this battle has happened billions of times before. Every time it ends the same way. They destroy each other, the universe resets, and the cycle starts over. Pops is revealed to be Mega Kranis. Born on planet Lollyland. Yes, they named it Lollyland. I'm sure they don't know about internet culture, but no, when I say that, I'm not talking about little anime girls. He was literally created as, quote, the embodiment of pure good. His brother Anti-Pops is the opposite, pure evil. And throughout the finale, Pops tries every physical attack to defeat his brother. Nothing works. Then Pops realizes something. He's been approaching this wrong. Instead of fighting, he needs to show love. So he hugs Anti-Pops while they both fly into the sun, sacrificing himself to break the cycle and save the universe. Creator J.G. Quintel explained in a panel that Pops had to die because his sacrifice symbolizes the sadness and loss that comes with maturity. The other characters were growing up, moving on, starting families. Obviously, except for Skips, he's immortal, which in itself is just sad. He's gonna have to see this cast die and move on, and then that cast die and move on. It sucks. That kind of growth requires letting go of things, including the show itself. After Pops dies, the episode jumps through 25 years of the characters' lives. They all move on. They do build a statue of Pops in the middle of the park. It makes it clear that Pops' death gave everyone else a chance to live. Up to this point, everything tells us that the sacrifice was made out of love, not because of a battle being lost. But then something interesting happens. The camera pulls back to reveal an old TV in what appears to be heaven. A VHS tape labeled Regular Show ejects from the player, and we hear Pops' voice, "Jolly good show." And why is that so interesting? It presents death not as an ending, but as a transition. It's not always easy to talk about the afterlife without sounding preachy about it, and it did it so well that it's rated 9.9 on IMDb, one of the highest rated episodes of any cartoon. Steven Universe BLM PSA. Steven Universe ran on Cartoon Network from 2013 to 2019 and had a spin-off called Steven Universe Future that ran from 2019 to 2020. The show was about a young boy named Steven and the Crystal Gems, aka alien warriors who protect humanity from the evils it faces, those being Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl. Oh, and Steven. The show was very LGBT friendly, which meant it was controversial, but it's also loved by many. I mean, Steven Universe has an extremely strong and diehard fan base whether people like it or not. Though I've only heard that the Steven Universe fan base is cringeworthy, and it seems even some of the people in the fandom don't like the community either. I do really like the animation style though. I always have. Oh, and the theme song. That's just kinda hard, I'm not gonna lie, that's just kinda hard. Anyway, in 2020, the Steven Universe team released a short on YouTube titled Don't Deny It, Defy It. And it starts off with two little boys on the playground holding hands, and one of them saying, "When we're older, let's get married," which leads another kid to say, "You can't get married. Black people can't marry white people." Yeah, she says it in that tone. I don't know if I can play the clip for copyright, but if I can, then you're probably about to hear it.
Hey, when we're older, let's get married.
Ha! You can't get married.
Why not?
Black people can't marry white people.
And then Garnet comes in to say, "Don't be racist." And then we get a behind the scenes look of the filming of the PSA, and the little white kid says, "Stuff like this doesn't actually happen in real life," which leads to him getting a little lesson about how racism is very real in the real world. That's it. Honestly, at first look, I didn't give a fuck. I didn't think it was good or bad. But geez, 125,000 dislikes? What went wrong? Since the comments were disabled due to it being a YouTube Kids video, I found a video uploaded around the same time by a YouTuber named Just the Robot titled Steven Universe, Kids Don't Be Racist, PSA is Strange. And the major complaint that people had was that the PSA tried too hard to bring the LGBT into this by making the kids in the commercial gay, which distracts people from the racism problem. I also saw some complaints about the little white boy apologizing too quickly, which just made it seem fake. So I'm guessing this is why there's a huge amount of dislikes. Though the Steven Universe team tried again in the following year and got a lot better reception. They got straight to the point and had a short conversation about being anti-racist. I'm guessing the dislikes on that was just people that just don't want their cartoon characters talking about real world matters, I think. After they slightly acknowledged the bad reviews of the last PSA, this time Steven's dad was the one explaining and talking about being an ally, and I see why it got a better reaction from the audience. There is such a thing as trying to be too progressive, which just makes the general audience annoyed. Even though this PSA got some dislikes as well, I'm glad they were able to end on a more positive note.
Carl the Collector, autism. Here's something you might not know. PBS Kids premiered their very first show with an autistic lead character in November of 2024, just last year. Well, I'm assuming you're watching this in 2025. Maybe you're watching this in 2026 since I'm literally recording this on Christmas Eve. But anyway, the show is called Carl the Collector, and it unfolds much like this. Carl's a raccoon who loves collecting things, fake mustaches, plushies, bottle caps, you name it. But what makes this show different is how it actually shows autism as it is in real life. It doesn't just mention it. Creator Zachariah O'Hora apparently got the idea from watching his own kids at school. They were in an inclusion program where autistic and neurotypical kids learn together, and he noticed something. The kids didn't see differences the way adults do. They just saw their friends. That light bulb moment became the foundation for Carl. Now, it wasn't that easy to make. The animation team had to figure out how to visually represent what it's like inside Carl's mind. Director Lisa Witek explained they'd literally go into Carl's eyes and add distortions or blurs to show what he's experiencing. When he's overwhelmed, the world around him becomes chaotic on screen, and it's not until he uses calming strategies like deep breathing, stimming with his fingers, all those things we talked about that are in the other cartoons, that things go back to normal. The show actually teaches kids these coping mechanisms while they're watching. Interestingly also, the stimming itself apparently took serious work to get right. The animation team created cycles of Carl wiggling his fingers, pacing when anxious, jumping on a trampoline. They'd send these to autism advisors for feedback. Remember, they couldn't animate Carl like a typical cartoon character. They had to be intentional about every movement because these behaviors are exactly how Carl regulates himself and processes the world. Take the episode The Fall. Carl's friend Nico trips and scrapes her knee, and Carl just freezes. He wants to help, but he doesn't know what to do. Nico gets upset because she doesn't understand why he didn't react. Later, with his mom's help, Carl actually tells Nico he's autistic and explains that sometimes his brain works differently. The writer Ava Ridgelhot based this on her own experience. She once saw her mom fall and froze up, feeling terrible because she didn't know how to respond. That authenticity is carried throughout the entire show. There's Lotta too, a fox who's also autistic but experiences it completely differently. She wears headphones for sound sensitivity and has masking, a way she hides her autistic traits. In Whole Lotta Lotta, she's bothered that everyone just calls her Headphone Girl. With Carl's encouragement, she creates a Lotta collection, showing all the cool things about herself, including the headphones. It's her way of saying, this is part of me and that's okay. There's another genius thing they do, and it's that they slowed everything down, taking inspiration from Charlie Brown cartoons. Quick cuts and fast-paced scenes can be overwhelming for autistic viewers. They even kept voice lines mostly unedited to make interactions feel more natural. Carl's speech has this deliberate cadence that isn't rushed. And get this, both Carl and Lotta are voiced by autistic child actors. Kai Barham, who voices Carl, collects things in real life like his character. The production team hired autistic writers, animators, and advisors throughout. Dr. Stephen Shore, who's autistic himself, reviewed everything to ensure authenticity. The show works because it presents autism as just another way of being. Carl struggles with anxiety in new situations, has difficulty when plans change, and sometimes can't maintain eye contact for too long. But his attention to detail and unique perspective helps solve problems his friends can't. It's all about understanding him, and that's exactly what kids need to see. Tainted Chemical X and Mojo Jonesin, Powerpuff Girls Season 2, Episode 24. The episode in question here is called Mojo Jonesin, and it aired during Season 2, and honestly, the allegory in it is so obvious it's almost funny. The episode begins after an air show where the Powerpuff Girls are showing off their abilities at Pokey Oaks Kindergarten. 4 kids, Mary, Joey, Jeff, and Kim, are walking home discussing how cool it would be to have superpowers just like the girls. That's when they're approached by a suspicious figure in a trench coat calling himself Mojo Overcoat. Yep, you guessed it, it's Mojo Jojo in disguise. And he's got Chemical X. Now, Chemical X in this universe is the substance that created the Powerpuff Girls in the first place. It gives you superpowers.
So when Mojo offers it to these kindergartners, they're excited. I mean, it would be insane if they weren't, given the admiration for the Powerpuff Girls, and so even though it's being offered by a stranger, they view it as something amazing. They take it, and suddenly these 4 kids are flying around Townsville, shooting laser beams from their eyes, using ice breath, and demonstrating super smell. They're experiencing what it's like to be superhuman, and it's thrilling. But here's where the drug allegory kicks in. The chemical X wears off almost immediately. The kids crash back to reality, powerless again, and that's also when the addiction is revealed. Jeff frantically declares he would do anything for more chemical X. And right on cue, Mojo Jojo appears to offer them more. But this time there's a condition. They have to destroy the Powerpuff Girls. Despite knowing this is wrong, the kids agree. They're so desperate for another hit of chemical X that they're willing to attack the heroes of their city, the very girls they were just admiring hours earlier. And they do it. They gang up on the Powerpuff Girls, each taking turns attacking Bubbles, landing punches and kicks on Buttercup, shooting Blossom with their laser eyes. The girls go down unconscious. That's when Mojo finally reveals himself. He tells the kids exactly what they were: pawns. He used them to destroy the girls so he could take over Townsville. The kids are shocked, realizing they've been manipulated and that they're responsible for what happens to the Powerpuff Girls. They try to chase Mojo, but the chemical X wears off mid-pursuit. Then they're powerless again, crashing to the ground. Jeff gets an idea though. The 4 kids rush to the unconscious Powerpuff Girls, and they transmit the last of the chemical X remaining in their bodies through their hands, reviving the girls. The Powerpuff Girls forgive them immediately, reminding the kids to quote, just say no when dealing with Mojo Jojo. Then they fly off to stop Mojo at the mayor's office. It's back at school that the episode really shows its message. The girls explain how the chemical X was contaminated. Mojo had put quote funny stuff in it that changed how the kids thought. It altered their judgment, made them do things they normally wouldn't do. It's less tragic, but I think it does a good job of explaining to kids how drugs turn a person into someone they're not. Dr. Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb. When we think about parental failure in cartoons, we usually picture neglect, abuse, or outright abandonment, but Phineas and Ferb gave us something a lot harder to name. It's the kind of failure that comes wrapped in good intentions, the kind where a parent is clearly trying and still somehow missing the point. Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz is the evil scientist of the show, self-declared villain, a builder of overly complicated gadgets, nemesis to a secret agent platypus. I mean, that's his whole thing. He's also a divorced dad with a teenage daughter named Vanessa, and that's the dynamic that runs through the entire series. But like I already said, I don't think he's a bad father. At least not in the dramatic sense. The show just makes him out to never get parenting right. The episode Finding Mary McGuffin is where that pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Doofenshmirtz shows up at his ex-wife Charlene's house on the wrong weekend because he has a surprise for Vanessa, something he'd been working towards for years, and the moment he pulls it out, Vanessa's face falls. She was expecting a car. What she got was a discontinued children's doll she asked for when she was 7 years old. She's 16 now, so clearly not the best gift. And to make it clear here, from his perspective, this is a huge gesture. He says, you know, I may be an evil scientist, but it doesn't take a degree purchased from the internet with your ex-wife's money to know how special and important you are to me. And Vanessa, in that moment, actually receives it. She walks to her room to think about all the times he embarrassed her, all the times he tried, and she puts the doll on her shelf, although that doesn't really last long. While Vanessa is sitting with this emotional moment of a caring dad, her mom Charlene walks into the room looking for random donation boxes. She spots the doll near some junk, assumes it's part of the pile, and hands it off to a charity truck without a second thought. And just like that, the one thing Doofenshmirtz almost got right is reversed like if it didn't happen. Although to be fair, Vanessa eventually gets the doll back, but you get the point. It's a situation describing a father who has spent years confusing effort with understanding or hitting right below or right above the mark. He's present and he's trying, but he still keeps showing up slightly wrong. Wrong weekend or the wrong gift. Interestingly, or rather sadly, this pattern of behavior doesn't come from a vacuum. It has a background, and that's why the whole show is genuinely sympathetic to Doofenshmirtz. His own childhood was one long exercise in neglect. Neglectful parents, birthdays being celebrated alone, being used as a lawn gnome while his brother got everything. He's parenting from a place of deep deprivation, overcorrecting constantly, and doing a little bit too much. I also want to make it clear that we as the audience can tell that Doofenshmirtz is genuinely trying. Even though his childhood seemed to be one of the worst, he is still trying. And I think Phineas and Ferb does a great job at getting that across. Bambi. Death of Bambi's mom. Now, you didn't think we'd leave out the most traumatic cartoon death that was watched by your grandpa when he was a kid, did you? Yup, Bambi is an old one, and it did indeed shock an entire generation. Seriously, generations of people. This 1942 Disney film represents their first vivid encounter with death, and it left a mark. We're talking about people who saw it in theaters as children and still remember crying decades later. I even found a forum where someone said their grandmother recalled that every child in the theater was in tears. You know, that says a lot, and it's crazy that it could have been way worse. Now, what do I mean by that? In an earlier version of the script, Bambi was supposed to find his mother's body lying in a pool of blood. Walt Disney himself vetoed that idea, saying it would be going too far. more. Even his own daughter Diane begged him to cut the death scene entirely. He refused, claiming he was bound to stick to the original story, though critics pointed out he'd taken plenty of other liberties with the source material. Anyway, what exactly happens in the scene? Well, about 40 minutes into the film, after we've watched this loving relationship develop between Bambi and his mother, they're eating spring grass in the meadow when she senses hunters. She tells Bambi to run and keep running, don't look back. Gunshots ring out, and just after she disappears off screen, you hear it. That solid gunshot indicating a hit. Bambi makes it to safety, turns around excitedly saying, "We made it, mother," and then nothing. Just silence and confusion as he searches through the snow calling for her. His father finally appears and says that his mother can't be with him anymore. That's it. Writer Larry Morey made the call to keep the death off screen, arguing it would have just as much impact without the added trauma of actually showing it. Turns out he was right. Media studies researcher Marissa Lamon has studied how people remember the scene and found that many people swear they saw Bambi find his mother's body, even though that never happened in the final film. The trauma was so intense that it actually changed how viewers remember the movie. And yes, this example really stands out from the rest because it takes a completely different approach than Sesame Street would 41 years later. There's no discussion of death being natural or permanent, and neither is there any processing of emotions. The film then jumps forward in time and we see Bambi as an adult buck. This is argued as presenting an inaccurate depiction of how parental death affects children. It essentially looks over the trauma and long-term bereavement that would realistically follow such a loss. Bambi just moves on, which isn't how grief works, especially for children. Maybe that's why the scene has become collectively traumatic in cartoon culture, as many viewers were left not knowing how to process what had just happened. Carly's mom and opioid addiction, Sesame Street. In 2019, they introduced Carly, a bright green Muppet with yellow hair whose mother is battling addiction. And the reason they did it was because 5.7 million children under the age of 11 were living in households with a parent struggling with substance use disorder. Now, Carly had already been introduced earlier that year as a Muppet in foster care, but in this initiative, viewers finally understand why her mother had to go away for a while. In this episode, Carly explains to Elmo why her mom attends meetings every day. She's playing with Elmo and Chris, one of the Sesame Street shopkeepers, when Elmo asks about the meeting. Chris explains that Carly's mom goes to help herself get better, that everyone there is having the same kind of hard time. Carly adds, "You see, well, my mom needs help learning to take better care of herself, so she talks to people with the same problem." Then Carly reveals something else, that she goes to her own meetings. Special kids only meetings where all the parents have the same problem. They sit in circles too, and at the end they hold hands and sing. The video ends with all three of them holding hands, but there's more to it. In another segment, Elmo's talking to his dad after playing Monster Ball. He mentions that Carly's mom was taken away for a while, but now she's back, and she looks and acts differently. Elmo's dad explains that Carly's mom had a disease called addiction. He tells Elmo that it makes people feel like they need alcohol or drugs to feel okay, and that it can make a person act strange in ways they can't control. When Elmo asks why she doesn't just stop, his dad explains that's not something you can just stop doing, at least not without help. He tells Elmo that Carly's mom is working on getting better. Basically, this show not only explained what addiction does to a person, but they really went in on the children left behind, the ones living with the chaos, feeling responsible, carrying guilt that isn't theirs to carry. They gave those kids permissions to feel their feelings and reassurance that it's not their fault. Most importantly, they showed them that they're not alone. Sesame Street, as always, doing it right. I'm pretty sure Sesame Street has been in every single, serious topics video that I do about cartoons. Yes, I know it's live action, but I still include them. But yeah, big shout out to Sesame Street. I'm sure they needed the that small show needed a shout out from this humongous YouTuber. Pause. All right, let's head on to the next one. Helga Pataki from Hey Arnold. Hey Arnold understood better than almost any other kids cartoon from its era that it's not always a dramatic incident that breaks a kid, that sometimes it's the accumulation of 1,000 small moments of being invisible, totally out of anyone's focus. Helga G. Pataki is the bully of the series, loud, aggressive, mean to pretty much everyone she meets, and secretly, or is completely, desperately in love with the same boy she torments on a daily basis. For most of the series, she's the antagonist, but the season 4 episode Helga on the Couch is the episode where the show stops and tells you exactly why she is the way she is. And the answer is kind of a hard one. It starts at school. A new child psychologist named Dr. Bliss has come to observe the students, and she zeroes in on Helga almost immediately, watching her push kids aside in the hallway. Then Helga gets sent to the principal's office, and Dr. Bliss recommends sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays. When Helga gets home and tells her parents, Bob Pataki's first response is irritation, not concern about his daughter. He tells her point blank to not, quote, blab anything about them to some school shrink, and adds that this never would have happened with Olga. Miriam, Helga's mother, barely says anything at all. The moment Helga leaves the room, both parents go right back to complaining that she isn't more like her sister. So Helga shows up to her first session anyway, but in a trench coat and fedora, determined to not give anything away. She deflects, she stalls, and even tries running out the door. But Dr. Bliss is patient, and slowly these walls she's put up come down. What comes out during the session in pieces through flashbacks is the actual story of Helga's childhood. And the most important flashback is the one about her first day of preschool. Bob and Miriam are standing over Olga at the piano, praising her spelling bee wins, marveling at how talented she is. Helga stands in the middle of the kitchen and asks who's taking her to preschool. Nobody answers. She walks to school alone and it's raining. She has no coat and no umbrella, and if that's not enough, the streets are rough with sketchy looking strangers passing her. A car even splashes mud on her and a large stray dog steals her lunchbox. Mind you, she's only 4 years old in this flashback. When she finally arrives soaked at the school, a little boy with a football-shaped head appears next to her and holds his umbrella over her head. It's Arnold. He's the first person all day, maybe in her life, to notice that she exists, and he even compliments her bow. When another kid steals her graham crackers later, Arnold gives her his own. Helga, overwhelmed by a kindness she has no framework for, immediately develops a crush. And when the other kids see it and start laughing at her, she does the only thing that makes sense to a 4-year-old who's never been taught how to be vulnerable. She turns it into aggression. Sitting with Dr. Bliss years later, Helga finally admits that, quote, nobody in my house even knows I exist. Bob is loud, self-focused, and emotionally unavailable. Miriam, who the show quietly depicts across multiple episodes as an alcoholic masking it with smoothies, is consistently checked out, tired, slurring, absent, every way that matters. They just never thought about that first day of preschool, and that's its own kind of damage. I think this show and this episode specifically about Helga really shows you a big reasoning as to why kids can be bullies. This is not a real statistic, but it seems like 99% of the times it is because there's a negative household. Rugrats, Mother's Day. For 3 seasons, nobody questioned why Chucky Finster from Rugrats didn't have a mom. The anxious red-haired toddler just lived with his equally nervous dad, Chaz, and that was that. But behind the scenes, the show's creators have been wrestling with this question since season 2. Co-creator Paul Germain wanted to address it early on, so he pitched 2 storylines to explain Chucky's mom's absence. Either she was divorced from Chaz or she had died. Nickelodeon executives rejected both, saying death would be quote-unquote scary and children wouldn't want to see it. The network essentially told them, we can't talk about her being divorced and we can't talk about her being dead, so we can't talk about her at all. So for 65 episodes, they just didn't. Germain left the show in 1993, frustrated that this major character question remained unanswered. But when new writers took over for season 4, Nickelodeon changed its stance. On May 6, 1997, Mother's Day, strategically they aired Mother's Day, a half-hour special that finally revealed what happened to Chucky's mom. The episode opens with Angelica explaining Mother's Day to the babies. Tommy, Phil, and Lil all excitedly talk about making gifts for their moms, sharing memories of special moments with them, but Chucky doesn't have those memories. He admits he sometimes dreams about playing with a woman outside, but he doesn't know who she is. The babies try to find Chucky a new mom, but none of it works. Eventually, they end up in a closet where Chaz has hidden a box of his late wife's belongings. Inside, Chucky finds a photograph of the woman from his dreams. That's when Chaz sits down with his son and explains that the woman is Melinda, his real mother. She died of a terminal illness shortly after Chucky was born. Chaz talks about her, then reads a poem that she wrote for Chucky while in the hospital. At the end, Chucky tells his friends that his mom is, quote, in the flowers, clouds, grass, sun, and in the wind, and he's incredibly happy about it. This episode took a completely different route than what networks typically allowed in the 90s. Most animated series avoided permanent loss entirely to keep things light. But Rugrats demonstrated that you could address parental death without traumatizing kids, through the eyes of babies who saw the world with beautiful simplicity. The case of the lowest crime? Cops. Last on our list is an episode that literally describes what rank drug abuse takes among other evils in society. That's at least according to the writers. So back in the late 1980s, the show in question, Cops, full name Central Organization of Police Specialists, was a kids cartoon about this high-tech police squad protecting the futuristic Empire City from experienced criminals. The criminal network was led by a crime lord named Big Boss, and week to week this guy would go totally nuts with things like robbery, extortion, and high-tech chaos, and as expected, was totally okay with all of it. But then in the episode we're talking about today, the show's writers decide that there's one line even the super criminal will not cross. And ladies and gentlemen, that line is drugs. Now, like many other episodes in the show which focus on a new crime and villain, this one was no different as it introduces a new villain named Addictum. He's anything you would think a low-rank dealer in the 80s looked like. He's physically weak, thin, with his entire personality being a drug lord. He sells a product known as Crystal Twist, which is a sparkling crystal-like drug. It's pretty enticing. It's neon, shiny, almost pretty. Anyway, the episode treats it like a sci-fi version of the hard stuff. One touch and you're an instant addiction. So as the story picks up, Addictum walks into Big Boss's office with the confidence of a low criminal just about to sell the next big idea to their boss. He pitches Crystal Twist as the new moneymaker for Empire City. After all, it's a drug so powerful that the entire city will be hooked. In any other crime story, this would be the kind of offer that a kingpin would instantly jump on. But then here's where we get to see the episode's perspective on drugs and addiction. The big boss doesn't just say no, he actually explodes. He has a dictum thrown out and makes a rather ironical speech for a crime boss. He explains that drugs are, quote, the lowest crime. Drugs kill. And even he wants nothing to do with them. This is the episode's central image or message. The crime boss who, again, ironically will rob the city blind, but draws the line at dealing drugs. Anyway, Big Boss also forces his crew, the criminals that hang out with him, to swear they'll never touch drugs. Actually, he commands them, not just asking them nicely. And I think this is pretty intentional, as it creates the perspective that even if the villains think drugs are too evil, the message to kids is supposed to be crystal clear. Now, despite all the vows and moral speeches, Big Boss's kind of dim-witted nephew, Berserko, literally falls into a shipment of Crystal Twist. He doesn't smoke it, but contact with the glowing crystals proves enough. The drug goes straight through his skin, and the effects hit almost instantly as we see him collapse and end up hospitalized, his life hanging in the balance. I don't know about you, but for a kid's show, I think this is about as close as it gets to depicting an overdose. Big Boss panics in an unexpected twist for a criminal boss, and he goes to the authorities and joins forces with the cops team to hunt down a dictum and destroy the Crystal Twist operation. For a brief window, the show's main villain becomes an ally. Cops and Big Boss's gang sweep through Empire City, shutting down drug distribution points and chasing a dictum through the streets. The stakes are framed as bigger than any normal episode, and it's only once the mission is accomplished does everything get back to normal. Normal being cops fighting with Big Boss on traditional crimes. Hank Hill from King of the Hill. Now, before we get into the details of this next case, let me just put it out there that King of the Hill isn't exactly a kid's show. It aired on Fox, and it's aimed at teens and young adults, and deals with the kind of slow, grounded parenting failures that don't involve magic or fantasy or wishful flashbacks, just a real household where things can go wrong. That being said, I present to you Hank Hill. The thing about Hank is that he's not a bad father in any obvious way, very much like Dr. Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb. He works, he provides, he shows up, but sometimes does all those in the almost right fashion. Season 1, Episode 10, Keeping Up with Our Joneses, is the episode where all that kinda comes out well. His idea of discipline accidentally does far more damage than the thing he was trying to stop. Bobby Hill is about 11 years old. He and his friend Joseph find a stray cigarette in a dumpster behind a gas station, sneak into the men's bathroom, and light it up. As luck would have it, Hank stops at the same station. He pushes the door open and finds his son standing there with a cigarette in his mouth. So Hank does what Hank does. He decides to fix it immediately with force and basically no real thought through plan. Probably out of anger, I don't know. He marches Bobby home and makes him smoke an entire carton, like the whole carton. The logic being an old school idea, sometimes called a radish cure. Smoke so much that once you get sick, you'll never want to touch one again. And keep in mind that before that, they read the health warning on the box, and Bobby genuinely thinks cancer and emphysema are the ingredients. That's the level of understanding both of them are working with going into this. So, as any cartoon show, the plan backfires completely. Bobby does get sick partway through, which briefly satisfies Hank, but he keeps going. And by the end of it, Bobby is addicted. A child who tried one cigarette on a dare is now physically dependent on nicotine because, well, his father forced an entire carton into him as punishment. A punishment that was of course not quite right. And it doesn't stop there. The smell of the smoke triggers something in Hank, who used to smoke before Bobby was born and quit when Peggy got pregnant. Within days, Hank and Peggy have both relapsed. The whole household is now addicted. You can definitely see why I said this is a father that tries to do things right, but then doesn't quite hit the mark. Just like Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz showed up for his daughter's birthday on the wrong weekend with the wrong present. Anyway, with the entire household addicted, it all leads to the smoking cessation support group. Hank tells the room what he did, made Bobby smoke a full carton as a lesson, and fully expects them to nod and agree that it was a tough love parenting thing. Instead, the entire group is horrified and kicks him out. It's funny that Hank genuinely cannot understand why he did what he thought was right, what seemed like common sense to him, was seen as taboo and wrong by other people. Interestingly, even with Bobby's addiction and him and Peggy relapsing, the inappropriateness of his action doesn't quite hit him until a room full of strangers react with a collective disgust. The episode ends with the family managing to quit together, and it wraps up relatively cleanly. But it got you thinking, where is the line between actual abuse and just parenting to the best of your knowledge, even if that knowledge is flawed? Also, I'm pretty sure most kids growing up with, quote, tough love can relate to this episode. Bobby's World. Season 3, Episode 7, The Music. Sometimes a kids show surprises you with how mature it can be. Bobby's World, the Fox Kids cartoon about a preschooler with an overactive imagination, wasn't exactly known for heavy topics, but in 1992, they aired an episode called The Music. It taught kids that death doesn't erase what someone taught you. The episode opens up with Bobby dreading his first test at preschool, a shapes test that got him imagining nightmare scenarios about failing and ending up working terrible jobs for the rest of his life. You know, typical kid anxiety blown completely out of proportion through Bobby's wild imagination. Enter Abe, the elderly crossing guard at Bobby's school. He's one of those characters that, yes, I know I complain about one-off characters, but he is a one-off character. They purposely kill him in this episode just to talk about death. When Bobby expresses his anxiety about the test, Abe tells him about, quote, the music, except he's not talking about actual music. He's talking about everyday sounds, the wind, traffic, birds, people talking. He sings a little song about finding beauty in the simplest, most mundane things. By the way, if you appreciate having ears, don't listen to the song. Whoever voices the Bobby kid they have this annoying high-pitched voice at all times. And it's just, I don't, you know how Timmy Turner has an annoying voice, but somehow we all dealt with it? This one is different. This one is just, it's an ugly voice.
There's music everywhere in the street.
Even though his voice is annoying, it's a sweet scene where this crossing guard, basically just doing his job, becomes a caring mentor figure to Bobby, teaching him to appreciate the world around him instead of getting stuck in his own worries. The next day, Bobby's so caught up thinking about Abe's lesson that he daydreams through his entire test and turns in a blank paper. His parents are called. His father Howard gives him a stern talk on the way to school about not daydreaming in class. Bobby ironically daydreams through that lecture too, but when they arrive at school, there's a new crossing guard and Abe isn't there. So the new crossing guard explains to Bobby and Howard that Abe passed away over the weekend. Howard adds directly, and this is important, that this means Abe is gone forever. So what happens next? Well, instead of dwelling on the sadness of Abe's death, it pivots to what he left behind. His father explains that even though Abe is gone, his memory will live on in what he taught Bobby. And that lesson in finding beauty in everyday things, that becomes Bobby's tool for coping. Bobby goes back to school and retakes his shapes test. This time, he found the shapes in the world around him in the music of everyday life, and he passes the test. And about that, research shows that making meaning out of difficult experiences can actually be an important gateway for coping with loss. When children can connect a deceased person's teachings or values to their own actions, it gives them a sense of continued connection. Sure, death is permanent, but the people we lose continue to shape who we become. No pun intended. For a cartoon about a kid with a wild imagination and an annoying voice, sorry, didn't mean to diss you, Bobby, that's a pretty profound lesson to land. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Season 4, Episode 25. Next up, we've got something completely different, an action cartoon that doesn't hold back when it came to permanent loss. The 2012 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series had already killed Splinter once before in Season 3, but time travel undid that death. This time, well, it basically insisted on the point it tried making the first time. The episode tells you everything. Requiem. Requiem is a Catholic mass for the deceased. It aired in February of 2017 and scored a 9.4 on IMDb, the highest rated episode of the entire series, and the setup for it was brutal. Super Shredder, now stabilized and more powerful than ever, launches an all-out assault. During a climactic rooftop battle at Wolf Hotel, he impales Splinter with his claws and throws him off the building. There's no blood shown, you know this is still a kid show, but the impact is clear. As the turtles carry Splinter's body to their vehicle, the screen fills with a montage of memories, flashbacks to training sessions, conversations, moments of guidance. Each turtle remembers something different, kind of like Bobby's world did. The grief and death are presented in how Splinter's teachings and presence remain alive in each turtle's mind. Requiem took a risk by making loss permanent and painful, but it also demonstrated that honoring someone's memory and carrying forward their wisdom can coexist with grief. Splinter's gone, but his lessons remain, and sometimes that's the most honest thing you can teach. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, special episode. Here's a brief moment, but still one of the most powerful lessons in children's television. In March of 1970, Fred Rogers turned what could have been just another routine episode into something far more profound. He discovered a dead fish in his aquarium, and instead of quickly cutting to a different scene or replacing it off camera, he did something completely in character. He taught. The episode starts normally enough. Rogers arrives with a wooden pentagon, counts its sides, shows a short film about fish, then he walks over to check on his own aquarium, and there it is, a fish lying motionless at the bottom. He carefully removes it, trying to revive it with salt water. It doesn't respond, so he wraps it in a paper towel and quietly takes it outside to bury it. Now, most shows would have just stopped here. Simple cause and effect. Fish died, fish buried, lesson over. But Rogers understood something deeper about how children process grief. Once he's back inside, he starts talking about his childhood dog, Mitzi, how much he loved her, how she got old and died, how sad he felt when it happened. He even shows viewers a picture of Mitzi that he's kept all these years. He models the behavior he wants children to learn. And it's so casual, so natural. I mean, turns out, the man had studied child development extensively. He understood that children learn attitudes not from being told, but from observing. As he himself once quoted an old Quaker saying, "Attitudes are caught, not taught." What makes this approach so effective? Well, Rogers was essentially pioneering what we call now social and emotional learning decades before the term was coined. That happened in 1995 when Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence came out. But Rogers had been doing it since 1968, recognizing emotions, understanding them, labeling them, expressing them appropriately, and regulating them. The episode assures children that the heavy sadness they might feel doesn't last forever. But Rogers never says that explicitly. Instead, he demonstrates it through his own experience, showing kids that yes, he was very sad when Mitzi died, but now he can talk about her and remember the good times without overwhelming grief. The episode became highly acclaimed and was later included on a special VHS release about helping children understand grief. Boy Meets World, 1999. Here's the complicated part about grief. Sometimes the person who dies is the same person who hurt you most. And figuring out how to mourn someone you had an awful relationship with, that's something most kids shows won't touch. But Boy Meets World did exactly that in January of 1999. The episode opens up with Chet Hunter showing up at Pembroke College where his sons Sean and Jack are students. Chet's been an absent father for most of their lives, the kind who disappear for months, show up making promises, then vanish again. Sean spent years cleaning up after him when he came home drunk, sitting next to him hoping he'd say something, anything. Jack grew up knowing he had a father who was just gone his whole life. So when Chet appears claiming he's finally staying put, that he's got his life together this time, Sean doesn't believe him. And honestly, his skepticism makes complete sense. This pattern has repeated itself Sean's entire childhood. Then Chet has a heart attack after eating a piece of cake at the campus apartment. The stress of Sean's constant badgering about when he's leaving town again probably didn't help. Not to say I'm blaming the kid, but definitely they were arguing heavily. They rush him to the hospital and suddenly Sean's faced with something he wasn't prepared for. His deadbeat dad might actually die. At the hospital, the brothers process this completely differently. Jack's arranging for private rooms and professional care. Sean's insisting he'll take care of his dad himself, refusing charity. And that tension between them gets raw. Sean finally explodes, asking Jack if he's really Chet's son. Does Jack know what it's like to sit next to him all night hoping for a conversation, to clean up after him drunk, to lie in bed wondering if you did something that drove him away? Jack says that no, he didn't. It's a brilliant moment because the show acknowledges both experiences are valid. Jack's grief is real even without those memories. Sean's is complicated because he has too many of them and most aren't good. Then Chet wakes up. He gives him an honest conversation. They have this moment where he promises this time he's staying. Sean finally believes him. And then Chet has a second heart attack and dies. The hospital scene is actually one of the only scenes where the entire cast appears together. Because that's what the show understood about grief. You need people. You don't have to grieve alone. And that's probably the most realistic thing about it. Death is hard enough when you love someone unconditionally, but when that relationship was complicated, that requires a whole different kind of support. Boy Meets World got that right.